At this time, I'll call to order the combined pre-council city council meeting on February 18, 2014. Mayor Thomas Girani presiding. Father Lesher of Sacred Heart Catholic Church at 337 South Ottawa Street here in Joliet will lead us in the prayer and in the pledge following the prayer. Father.
Thank you. So we take a second to place ourselves in the presence of our loving, merciful God. God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God of Jesus of Nazareth, we thank you that you have revealed yourself to us as a God of justice. We pray tonight for our mayor, city council, staff, that they will continue to courageously build up the kingdom of God here in Joliet through their decisions tonight and in the future. We thank you through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Father. Thank you. Thanks, Father.
Won't you blast my deacon?
Thank you, Father.
Start with roll call. Mayor Girani.
Here.
Councilwoman Barber, absent. Councilman Girl.
Here.
Councilman Hug.
Here.
Councilman McFarland.
Here.
Councilman Morris.
Here.
Councilman Odeker.
Here.
Councilwoman Coleman, absent. Councilman Turk.
Here.
Just for the record, Councilwoman Coleman did call. She couldn't make it for some health reasons in her family. So,
Next is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as written?
So moved.
Second.
Kristen?
Motion seconded to approve. Councilman Girl.
Aye.
Councilman Hug.
Aye.
Councilman McFarland.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Odeker.
Aye.
Councilman Turk.
Aye.
Mayor Girani.
aye.
Motion carried. Council committee reports. Finance committee report.
Mayor, the Finance Committee comprised of Councilman Girl and Councilman Hug met in the executive conference rooms prior to this meeting to review the minutes, the engagement letter for the 2013 audit, the preliminary financials, Public Safety Commission pensions additional contribution, personnel summary, conference travel, treasurer's reports, regular claims, found them all to be in order, recommend their approval. And at this time, if Rachel wouldn't mind coming up just to, or where she's at from there, explain some good news we had with some very preliminary and unaudited end-of-year figures.
Sure.
Thank you.
Good evening. As Councilman Turk mentioned, I just wanted to give a couple highlights about the 2013 preliminary unaudited numbers, as he stated. All operating funds do currently show an annual surplus, which is good news. The general fund expenditures were about 99.4% of the budget, or about 157.3 million. The general fund revenues came in at approximately 105% of budgeted estimates, also good news. Water and sewer revenues came in at approximately 102% of budgeted estimates, which is also good news. We'll be closing the books this week and turning them over to the auditors, who, when they're finished reviewing them, we will do a final presentation of the year-end numbers. But overall, the numbers look positive at the end of 2013.
They're doing something right. Thank you. Thank you. Krista.
Public Service Committee report.
Mayor, the Public Service Committee met prior to this, prior to the finance meeting, Councilman McFarland and myself, to review the contracts, change orders, pay estimates, final payments, found them all to be in order, recommend their approval. We did have quite a bit of discussion on the bid package for the temporary platform and ticket office for the new ticketing while the new facility is being constructed. Temporary facility should be open to the public right around the first part of June.
And how long will that be in place?
About 18 months.
18 months, about a year and a half.
Months. And there'll be provisions made for those with disabilities to make it to their train.
Thank you.
Next is a presentation by Chip Rogers with Retail Strategies LLC.
Chip, you're on.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and staff. I will introduce myself this time. Last time I visited, I forgot to say, my name is Chip Rogers. I'm here on behalf of Retail Strategies. Retail Strategies is a national retail advisory firm. We work with cities across the country, helping them understand first what retailers should be in their markets and are not, helping them understand what are the opportunities for local retailers, helping them understand when they go and recruit retail, or when we go and recruit retail, what does that site setting need to look like? So that real estate piece, we can have the best retailers in the world that have their customers here, but if there are not proper real estate decisions that can be made, it is self-defeating. This is not a study, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. One of the values that I think we bring to the table at Retail Strategies is we're actually doing the implementation for our client cities. So going out on your behalf, putting the marketing materials together, going out and making contact with the retailers, the developers of record for certain retailers, for developers that are looking for opportunities, making those outbound calls, representing the city at trade shows like the International Council of Shopping Centers, Recon, their national event that's coming up in a couple of months, doing the follow-up all the way through that development continuum. So what I thought I might do is just walk through a brief presentation. I know you've got a full agenda. I saw it. There are a lot of pages there. I didn't read every item, but I know there are a bunch of them. Have plenty of time for questions and answers from there. So really our process is that market research and analysis is where it starts. So that is not just doing demographic studies or psychographic studies, but that's also coming into the market and helping build that strategic plan. So we have certain retailers that we believe are fits for this market. Where are we going to put them? Can we make real estate recommendations? We have certain settings that if we could do redevelopment of an area, maybe that makes sense. Through that retail recruitment of those property owners, the developers, the brokers that are representing those retailers, and you can see all of the things that come from a robust retail environment, so I won't spend a great deal of time on that. So that analysis, that first piece, it is that demographic research, but if you've ever used a credit card to make a purchase, if you've ever bought a movie on cable or satellite television, if you've ever used a rewards card at the grocery store, that information is tracked. And quite simply what we are doing at that piece is compiling that information to understand who you are as consumers. How are you spending your money and what retailers are targeting you? So you hear a lot about Big Brother. This is Big Brother from a marketing sense, helping people understand what the inclinations, what things are going to resonate with the consumers in this market. We're bringing a number of different sources for this information together to help people understand what is the opportunity for this market. One of the things that we're going to do through this process, and you'll see it in that presentation, is that retail gap analysis. So looking at other communities and other cities of similar settings and similar size with similar makeups of demographics and psychographics and all of that, and doing a gap analysis, what retail exists in those markets that doesn't. And by the way, when I say retail, that's inclusive of restaurants as well when I say that. So what retail and restaurants are making decisions to move those markets, and let's start targeting those in market analysis, and that's that real estate piece. So being able to go and look at specific properties and market those to the retail, the development community. So one of the things that I mentioned is there are lots of tools that we want to make sure we provide that give you value for the people that are already doing business here. So we have local retailers, we have mom and pop shops. What are the types of things we can do to help them start understanding what are the opportunities in that market? So before we start recruiting a national retailer to come in to the market or a regional, are there things that we can be working with our local retailers to help them understand and capitalize on that? So are there products in demand that are not being met? Can they add those to their shelves? Are they marketing themselves to the right populations? We're looking at all of those things and providing that value. And then I mentioned that peer analysis, so going and looking at other markets, what retail happens to be in place there. How many square feet of grocery can you support? How many square feet of food and beverage? How many square feet of restaurant? What is that opportunity? Are you missing certain categories? So that category analysis that comes with this process. And then, as I mentioned, that gap summary. So what does that look like? How many square feet of grocery can be supported in this trade area? Or how many square feet of men's clothing? And what will happen if you recognize that from a retail standpoint, from a tax standpoint, from a revenue standpoint? So the best research in the world provides absolutely no value if it goes on a shelf and it doesn't get used. And we see this time and time and time again, that cities have invested in marketing analysis or in projects. They look at it and they go, God, that's great information. And they put it on their shelves and they never do anything with it. Your staff and you as elected officials don't have the time, the expertise, the relationships, the knowledge to make these things happen. You're great people, you have your jobs, this is our job. And that's really what sets Retail Strategies apart, is we are a full-service real estate company. So we're going to start making those calls on your behalf, putting those marketing materials together, putting those plans together specific to a retailer by name. This is for you, Mr. Retailer X, and this is what this opportunity looks like, and here's what the value. Here's properties that you need to be looking at in this market, and here's what this setting is going to look like. I want to make sure we talk about it. It's not just the retailers, though. As I mentioned, it's also the development community. If I'm Home Depot, I have a developer of record that is doing my deals in the markets. We want those relationships with those people to bring to the table and have them looking at the market. I'm not saying Home Depot is a fit. I'm just throwing them out because everybody's familiar with them. But looking at those types of things, looking at that prospect list, targeting the specific retailers based on what that opportunity looks like. Market maximization, developing business, recruiting business, looking at those entrepreneurship opportunities for our local retailers. But the other thing that's very important in what we're doing is you have full access to inside of what we're doing on your behalf. So if you have a committee meeting or if you have a council meeting and you would like to see what retailers are being discussed on your behalf, you have that access to that 365 days a year. Go into that, pull that, see, we're talking to these people. The last call or the last conversation was 2 weeks ago. The next call is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. They're interested in this site. They're interested in this many square feet. This is the next step. This is what the opportunity looks like. So you can see as kind of our NASCAR slide, you can see what types of retailers we're recruiting and where we've had success. You can see this is by no means meant to be limiting, but just some brand names that most people can recognize when they see the restaurants, that you can start seeing the types of things. And these are all retailers that are very active. The retail landscape has changed a great deal, and it's changing very, very quickly. And that's the other piece of that knowledge that we bring to the table. If you haven't ever seen retailers scramble, watch for the next couple of years. This last Christmas season has made them start thinking about strategy a great deal. We had a very short time from Thanksgiving to Christmas. The weather was bad across the country, and guess what people started doing? Online shopping. So it's changing how we're shopping. We're still capping at about 12 to 15% of retail, I think, at the top end. As consumers, we still want to touch a product. We still want to try on a pair of shoes, for the most part, before we buy. So we're still looking at restaurants. We're never going to buy online unless we have the food delivered at home. But there are other things that are changing. So what we're seeing a great deal of right now, we'll talk a little bit about trends, is retailers downsizing. So instead of opening an 80,000 square foot box, I'm going to open a 35,000 square foot box in markets. That is great news for the second ring suburbs and what we call secondary markets, because all of a sudden we're built out our large boxes in the major metros. So we're starting to look at smaller boxes that can go further out, and that is very good news, I think, for all of us. I live in a second ring suburb of Fort Worth, whereas we're starting to see those opportunities come. I mentioned that online, this living document where you can always see what retailers are being contacted on your behalf, what are their next steps, what's the last contact. How often are we pinging those retailers so you can see all of this? And this would also include those developers of record. And then that key property catalog. One of the things that we're doing when we come into the market is helping you identify and encapsulate what those different properties look like. You've got some empty boxes, you've got some redevelopment, you've got some greenfield. It's putting all of those things together and start making that case. We're doing the aerials and all of the marketing materials that go with that on your behalf. And again, this is something that I will always mention. This seems like it should be a no-brainer. Oh, we can do that. We can put a map together. We can pull that. And it's not. It's actually, there's a lot that goes into it because you have to know what you're doing. Are we putting the right sites? Pulling that retail inventory in. We start making recommendations on site. So putting that marketing material and not putting things in front of the community that is time wasting or doesn't make sense to them. It is said that about 80% of every commercial project that takes place in the United States in a year is initiated the third week of May in Las Vegas at the International Council of Shopping Centers Recon Show. One of the things that we're doing on your behalf is making those outbound calls, setting appointments to have meetings with the retailers and the developers that are present there, starting to present what are the opportunities. That is not an opportunity to go and spend an hour and close a deal with those. That is an opportunity to spend 5 or 10 minutes with lots and lots of people, talk about what the opportunities are, and schedule follow-up for those. So we're doing those meetings on your behalf. There's the national show in Las Vegas. There's also a regional show. I'm actually speaking in a couple of weeks at the International Council of Shopping Centers regional, what they call the Idea Exchange in Chicago in a couple of weeks, talking about what these opportunities are. So there are lots of different opportunities to get that out. As I mentioned, we're providing lots of materials for use either by you or by local retailers. That is in a password-protected site called Basecamp, and this is what it looks like. It's got all of those materials that you can pull on 24/7, 365 days a year. And again, you know the benefits of retail. 20 or 30,000 square foot box pays big dividends in jobs and property taxes and revenue, all of those things that come with that. So what we typically will ask for in a project and an engagement like this is a 3-year commitment. Retail takes time. Those decisions for this year have probably already been made by the site selectors for those retailers. So what we're starting to work with is what are those opportunities look like in Q4 and 2015, 2016, what retailers can we bring to this market? So in year one, we're doing all that initial research, putting all the materials together, and starting that trade show representation, that outreach to specific retailers. In year 2 and 3, it's a maintenance of the materials, but we're continuing that outreach and making things happen. Year 4, if you choose, and we hope you will, we think we will, continue to work with you, it's doing all that updating as we go forward. So I'll talk real quickly about that continuum. So what you will see, and we get this, understanding the demand, understanding the opportunity, doing that research, and having a list of prospective retailers. That's the easy part. Understanding that is that sliver. But what do you do with all this information? All the marketing, the outbound calls, trade show representation, follow-up through letters of intent, presenting to a real estate committee, getting contract negotiation, and opening a store. And that's what we're proposing, that we have the ability for you to outsource this continuum to Retail Strategies. That's it.
I just have a couple questions. The second time I listened to your presentation, and I was, still am impressed. My only concern is, I read in the paper you signed an agreement with a neighboring city. You say you're going to go through the ICSC convention and represent us. How are you going to handle that conflict? In other words, when you're talking to a business, a restaurant,
Certainly.
how are you going to go in and represent us and not our neighborhood city?
Remember, through this process, we're representing specific properties. So you could have 2 or 3 properties where they're a fit, and they're going to come in and look. I think it's a benefit for us to have stronger relationships in this area, in this region, in this market. We're going to further our partnerships with the development community, further our relationships with retailers themselves. Understand that a lot of retailers will look at a market and say, well, I can't open 1 store. My distribution doesn't support that, but can I open 2 or 3 stores? Does that satisfy multiple demands? I think that's a benefit. Now, remember through this process as well, you'll be assigned a team specific to Joliet that will, they're not necessarily working with Plainfield, as you know, we're working with them. At the end of the day, we're presenting opportunities to retailers, developers to come to the market. It's ultimately their decision where they're going. If I were in your shoes, I would ask the same question, but I would be less concerned being in Joliet, frankly, than Plainfield. I mean, you're a much larger community than they are, but we will be representing you independently. I don't know if that.
I don't know if that answered my question either. If you're talking to what kind of business it is, I understand that we are going to have a group of people assigned to our city. That group also is going to know the group that's assigned to Plainfield. How are we going to know that they don't get together? I guess I'm concerned that being as it's so close, if it was far away, it'd be one thing. Being a neighborhood city.
Well, I understand. I think it's a benefit. I really do. I think when you start coming into the market, it's building those relationships. We're going to be here more. We're going to be working more with you. The retailers that are a fit for Plainfield, some of them may be a fit for Joliet, and some vice versa. I understand that, but I think we have to present to them the best opportunity for them based on the trade areas. You'll have multiple trade areas in the market that are competing with you within the city. There are multiple areas in that situation, so it's being able to present that best situation. You have an empty box, that's a better setting for a certain retailer as opposed to coming in and building new. It's again, in my opinion, the more opportunity we have to work with the folks here, the better it is for everyone.
Mayor?
Sure.
You actually took my comments, actually. I think the city of Joliet's well overdue for your type of services, but I have the same reservations. We butt up and incorporate next to the village of Plainfield, and I also read in the Times Weekly that they just retained you. I just don't see how it's not a conflict, that you're representing them and doing recruitment for them, but then you also want to do for the city of Joliet. How do you have an independent view and objective to go out there to really make us the priority? You follow me? I just don't see how it can happen. Maybe you can explain that a little bit better to us. I don't think you did answer the mayor's question, I'm sorry. But at the end of the day, I just don't see how we're so close to one another, how you could independently hold 2 contracts and put one in front of the other. Maybe you can reiterate that a little bit, and represent both.
We are presenting opportunities to retailers that have to ultimately make the decision what is the best setting for them. Where are they going to be successful in the long term? So if there is a retailer that is a fit for both, we're presenting both equally to that. And again, that doesn't matter if it's across the highway in Plainfield versus Joliet or from one side of Joliet to the other. We have to present the best opportunities to them. That's our reputation, that's your representation or reputation, and at the end of the day, they have to be successful. They're going to pick the best site for themselves, and we're presenting those opportunities and getting them here. I don't feel that there's an issue on our staff to say we're going to pick winners and losers. We're going to present the opportunities where a retailer can be successful, then it is up to them, their site selection committees, to make the right decision in that process.
How, Mr. Roger, how in terms of if incentives come? And Joliet has, as most know, at least the council in the strategic planning session, we don't have any defined incentive programs.
Right.
How do you, with due diligence, negotiate between Plainfield and what they're gonna offer, whether it's a TIF or a tax abatement, whatever, retail sales rebate, and our neighboring community and then with us? I mean, how do you independently, as a firm,
Well, being retained, there would never be collusion on that side. I mean, that's a legal we have staff counsel that will be looking at those pieces, so those would never be shared. So there would never be an opportunity to say, well, Plainfield's doing this, or we're gonna have to do this in Joliet. That just can't happen. That's representation. At the end of the day, Plainfield will have, if they were to get into an incentive, and I'm not saying you have to do incentives or you even should do incentives, but if you wanted to, those are completely dependent on what are your goals for Joliet, what are your goals for specific sites and real estate in Joliet, and that's independent of what anyone else is doing. I mean, you're always going to compete with neighboring communities on retail. We understand that. Again, I think the opportunities are very different from market to market.
no further question.
Just to clarify, and I believe the mayor and Councilman McFarland, I think I can illustrate what their concern is too. I live in and represent District 1. District 1 is comprised of Plainfield Township residents.
Okay.
That's how close we are.
Yeah.
We're sometimes referred to as Joe Field. Okay. So with that said, I think what we're trying to get at too is certainly when there's a clear winner, no matter who's representing you, that clear winner will be apparent to the developer, to the retailer, whoever's looking for a spot.
Okay.
But there's going to come more closely competitive situations where salesmanship is part of you delivering the services. And I think I hear you correctly in saying that you have several teams that you'll put together, and they would compete just like you would compete against one of the other two that made a presentation to us.
Sure.
They'd be competing against themselves to serve the interest of the client they're focusing on and representing. So I guess that, am I on the right track?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to that team to ultimately bring retail opportunities to Joliet.
And there might even be some advantage to some internal competition, who's going to bring home the prize for their client. So,
Yeah.
But my question is, what follows logically, Chip, is, okay, then every firm's got their A team and their B team.
I'm your A team. So
You're going to represent us.
I am on the team. So, and my job is to make sure that we deliver successfully, that my feet are the one that gets held to the fire, and I am completely comfortable with that. And I this is me saying this, and you understand that, but I see no conflict between the two. I think your settings it's going to be different retailers, different settings, different real estate for them, and different groups looking at the opportunities. And again, ultimately, it is up to the retailers. We're not signing the contract it is up to them to make the decision where they go. What we're trying to do is get them interested in this market.
Sell.
Exactly.
So, and I think Mayor, and Councilman Turk might agree too. This is a legitimate concern, that's why we're all asking questions, but by and far, what impressed the three of us the most was their hands-on and delivering
are
the
selling.
final product. Now, if we still believe that they are the top dog, do we give up on them just because somebody else decided to try to push us aside? And I don't mean that in a competitive manner, but, the services they offered were equivalent to the other ones, and what really tipped it to us is their hands-on approach.
Extra step.
Right, to actually sell us. And so I guess the only question is, can you sell us both without a conflict of interest? That's really what it boils down to.
I think I can.
Anybody else?
Just one question. What role would our community and economic director and our city manager have in this whole process? Would you work in conjunction with them? Or no?
Yeah, very much so. And I think they would have, typically, they would have an oversight role on our efforts. They would be providing input, they would be reviewing all the materials. I don't think you necessarily want all of that being bombarded at the council or mayor level. So, you know, the liaison between that, what are the initiatives, what projects are ongoing? Do we need introductions to, you know, I know you have looking at a master developer for City Center, so introductions to those types of people to make sure we're working in conjunction with them. So they would have more of a advisory and oversight role on what we're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Can I-
Go ahead, Larry.
No, he already had gone.
You already had a chance?
Yeah. We'll get back to him.
I just have a request when you're done.
Mr. Rogers, is there a similar situation where you have two cities neighboring that you represented? It could, I mean, is that something you could share with us? How did you-
Birmingham and Mountain Brook, Alabama. We're working side by side in neighboring communities.
Birmingham?
And Mountain Brook, which is an adjacent suburb. So
Could you, could you get us a contact number of those?
certainly,
So we can see how
Sure.
it's working out?
Yeah.
Please.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Just one request, and maybe the whole council would like to hear it. Jim Hock?
Yes.
Can we draw on your opinion, you know, with yours in as a city manager? I'm sure you have an opinion on the situation.
Well, yes, I do.
All right?
As you're all aware, we just went through the strategic planning process, and everybody was in agreement that economic development is one of the 5 top goals in the community. And we broke it down further, and our facilitator will be coming back to work with staff to make some specific recommendations to you on objectives. And I'm just wondering whether or not this is a little premature to decide that with limited resources, you know, marketing the retail is as important as some of the other objectives that get presented to you for your feedback and discussion and thought process. So I'm not discounting that this is a good idea. I'm just saying maybe we need to wait a little while to weigh those against some other criteria and decide at that point.
Jim, when do you have a meeting with?
I expect within the next couple of weeks, he'll be coming back to staff, and then we'll be putting together our recommendations to you all as well.
How many meetings would that take? You know, is that redundant?
Well, we're only going to have one follow-up meeting
Oh, is
with
that right?
with Craig Rapp.
Okay.
We'll do our work and present something to you as soon as we can. But even what we present involves your discussion and feedback and thoughts, and spending an evening, you know, an hour or so on, you know, we may, because there's 5 areas, we may do a couple one night and couple 3 another night, so that not to overwhelm you.
All right, okay. So, okay.
Good deal.
I know you stated at your presentation to ADC committee that you had to know by, I think, March, so you could get it together, go to the IC, et cetera. So they're gonna meet in a couple of weeks. I think that's a good point and idea. I think we're gonna wait and see what happens. All right?
Yeah, our commitment is if we can start as soon as we can in March, that we'll be ready to go with everything at the International Council of Shopping Centers.
Thank you.
And Mayor?
Yes.
This is a reminder of your request, just I want to make sure we
Oh,
do
yes.
that.
I got it.
Of them 2 cities, thank
Two
you.
cities, if we could.
So,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thanks, Chip, thank you. Oh. Roger?
Thank you. Roger Thompson, 1110 Nicholson. I happened to be here when Mr. Rogers was here the first time. I raised the question as to what we could do as a city to make this city more attractive to retailers. And I think that perhaps our city manager is starting to address some of those things. One thing that has come to my mind is that some people have mentioned to me that the Slammers Stadium would be a great place for soccer games. But it's my understanding also that there might need to be a capital improvement to get the facilities to drain. But that's just one idea, and I have a feeling that the council, and I appreciate the opportunity to attend those that retreat last week, but I have a feeling those things are happening. Maybe, you know,
If I may, Roger, I know that was discussed at one of the baseball committee meetings. The problem with soccer, you cannot do it during baseball season because it tears up the turf. So you'd have to do it prior or after the baseball season. When we discussed soccer, Joliet Township was looking at putting turf into the Silver Cross field. And if that happens, now you can use it for many more things, soccer, flag football, et cetera, even some high school football games with the turf. But with the natural grass, the soccer would, if they wear the cleats, maybe the young kids that don't wear the cleats, fine, but the older people, they'll tear the turf up.
no, that's my understanding. That would be the capital investment to make that turf, but I'm not, you know, somebody else more knowledgeable than me would know what the return on that would be.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Krista?
Next is consent agenda, approval of minutes. It's recommended the minutes of the pre-council meeting held on February 3rd, the regular meeting held on February 4th, and the special meetings held on February 11th and 12th stand approved as recorded. Council Memo 71-14, regular payroll for January 10th through the 23rd, 2014, $3,104,830.72. Treasurer's disbursements for January 2014, $12,550,302.80. Regular claims for January 2014, $2,376,245.66. And the treasurer's report for December 2013. It's recommended said regular payroll, treasurer's disbursements, regular claims, and the treasurer's report be approved also.
So moved.
Second.
No questions? Krista?
In motion and seconded, the consent agenda items be approved. Councilman Hugg.
Aye.
Councilman McFarland.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk.
Aye.
Councilman Turk.
Aye.
Councilman Girl.
Aye.
Mayor Durrani.
Aye.
Motion carried. Next, under public hearings, Council Memo 73-14, approving the annexation of .64 acres located at the northeast corner of Essington and Division. This includes the resolution approving the annexation agreement, an ordinance approving the annexation, and an ordinance approving the classification of the .64 acres to B3 zoning. It's recommended said ordinances and resolution be adopted.
Jim?
This is a annexation of a little over half an acre to allow a mattress store to be built on the site. And one important aspect, as you see from the screen there, that it's a very tight lot and it's surrounded by a lot of roadway there. And this is strictly a retail outlet, meaning they will not have any mattresses delivered. You would go in there, pick your mattress, and it'll be delivered directly to your home. So when they made a request for a decrease in the number of parking spaces, that went into consideration because you won't have any big trucks there making deliveries outside of the initial time that they bring the mattresses maybe annually to change out the old models.
Any questions? Is there a motion?
Yeah, I had a question, Mayor, on this, and I think we clarified it when we talked about it before. There will be no service access built on the two residential sides, right?
Right.
It's going to be strictly on the, I lost the name of it, on Division.
Right.
So Pinecrest and, right,
Yes.
won't have any. And that's for, as we might say, perpetuity. That's not just up front.
That's
They don't have
right.
that option.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Plus, good point, Councilman, but plus it's surrounded by trees, and those trees are gonna remain to soften the building.
That's right.
And I had some constituents who had called about it, and they have no problem with the store. They just want to make sure there's going to be no service accesses on the residential side. So with that said, if you're looking for a motion, I would move to approve, Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions? Krista?
In motion and seconded to approve, Councilman McFarland.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk.
Aye.
Councilman Turk.
Aye.
Councilman Girl.
Aye.
Councilman Hugg.
Aye.
Mayor Durrani.
Aye.
Motion carried. Council Memo 74-14, approval of an ordinance establishing the 2014 Joliet Special Service Area Number 1, Oneida Street, Prairie Avenue. It's recommended said ordinance be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
Questions? Krista?
The motion and seconded to approve, Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk.
Aye.
Councilman Turk,
Aye.
Councilman Girl,
Aye.
Councilman Hug.
Aye.
Councilman McFarland.
Aye.
Mayor Durrani.
Aye.
Motion carried. Council Memo 75-14, approval of an ordinance establishing the 2014 Joliet Special Service Area Number 2, Stone Street. It is recommended said ordinance be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
I'm sorry, anybody in the audience wish to address the first one or this one? I was supposed to ask, I didn't. This is a public hearing. Any questions? None? Krista?
It's motion and seconded to approve. Councilman Otterkirk,
Aye.
Councilman Turk,
Aye.
Councilman Girl,
Aye.
Councilman Hug,
Aye.
Councilman McFarland.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Mayor Durrani.
Aye.
Motion carried. Council Memo 76-14, approval of an ordinance establishing the 2014 Joliet Special Service Area Number 3, Eastern Avenue. It is recommended said ordinance be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
As I just said, same thing. Anybody want to address this public service, special service area? Seeing none, Krista?
The motion seconded to approve. Councilman Turk,
Aye.
Councilman Girl,
Aye.
Councilman Hug,
Aye.
Councilman McFarland.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk.
Aye.
Mayor Durrani.
Aye.
Motion carried. Under ordinances and resolutions, under ordinances, Council Memo 78-14, ordinances for the levy and assessment of taxes for 2012 Special Services Area. It is recommended said ordinances be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Krista? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually do have a question. This levy, I assume, I'm just kind of reading through the memo here, but basically this special levy, is this kind of like our 50-50 deal or 50-50 participation of our residents? And what we're doing is we are now, since all the numbers are in this particular project, we can go ahead and levy the residents with their portion of those costs. Is that what we're talking
That's
about?
true. It's very similar to the 3 public hearings you just had.
Right.
And now the as-built costs are in, and we know the exact cost.
Who actually sends, does the treasurer send out that special levy, or does the city do that?
The city actually does it. The
City?
collector's office, in the finance
Okay.
department does it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Krista?
It's motion and seconded to approve. Councilman Girl,
Aye.
Councilman Hug,
Aye.
Councilman McFarland,
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk.
Aye.
Councilman Turk.
Aye.
Mayor Durrani.
Aye.
Motion carried. Council Memo 79-14, an ordinance repealing a special use permit to allow a U-Haul truck and rental business in an existing structure located at 605 East Jackson Street. It is recommended said ordinance be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Krista?
Motion seconded to approve. Councilman Hug,
Aye.
Councilman McFarland,
Aye.
Councilman Morris,
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk.
Aye.
Councilman Turk,
Aye.
Councilman Girl,
Aye.
Mayor Durrani.
Aye.
Motion carried. Council Memo 80-14, an ordinance authorizing a special use permit to allow auto salvage and related sales of new and used auto parts in a tenant space located in an existing warehouse at 225 Maple Street. It is recommended said ordinance be adopted.
Entertain a motion to table?
Based on? No, wait a second. Anybody want a
Second.
Second. Motion tables is not debatable. Krista?
Do we have a specific tabling date or just a table?
The next meeting, Councilman, or?
Can we give it a month until we meet with some of the community groups that have some concerns with this?
We can.
Even March 8th?
Just, okay, go
Unless there's
ahead.
objection.
No, I'm reading the minutes, and there was only one person that objected, or asked questions, and that's.
I actually got an email, I think the council did this evening before the council meeting, that there's 2 neighborhood groups that had some concerns. And I want to see if possibly the owner and the groups can maybe sit down and work out a compromise.
But I got that, everybody got that email. But number 10 specifically spells out requirement conditions of the City of Joliet and State of Illinois licensing requirements. That was the thing that she questioned. I also got a following email from somebody from Kappa, and that person did not have any problem with it, nor did, I don't believe, Amy Sanchez, who represents Collins Street.
She's here.
Amy? Well, you want to?
Put on the spot.
Well,
Amy Sanchez, 110 Foss Avenue, Joliet. I actually didn't have an opportunity because I hold a full-time job to attend a hearing that was held during the daytime, so I apologize. But I would like an opportunity to go over the information with the owner there. Apparently, he's been operating already without the proper permits, and they've asked him to halt and to correct this. So we would like an opportunity to discuss with him if that's suitable.
Sure, sure. Sir?
That's me. I was here at the last meeting and they said if I could get, excuse me, licensed through the state, then the city would approve it. And I sent in for the license to the state. They wanted a background check. And since my lease was in 12 months anymore, because I leased it in October, I had to renew the lease for another year, which the landlord okayed. He'll do it for another year. I got the background check, and the state wants approval of the city, and the city wants approval of the state. So I need somebody to say yes, so the other one could say yes.
Go first.
The inspectors went, they looked at the building already. They told the landlord a couple little problems with some wiring and a drain's got to be put in. And he okayed everything as long as I get licensed. He doesn't want to dump money into it if I'm not going to get licensed, because then I got to pull out, and then he's stuck with the building that he can't run what he has to run with. But, I mean, if she wants to come talk to me, because they did shut me down. I thought I was doing everything right, but I wasn't. I thought my tax ID was my license, but I mean, I know about the business. I don't know about business. That was my problem. So everything did get halted. I laid off the people I had. I'm just trying to bring business into Joliet, business that I know, because that's all I got left to make a living is trying to do what I know. So if the city will give me a letter saying that it's okay, the state will give me my license, and it is governed by the
State of Illinois.
by the state, by Secretary of State. They govern all that with cars and make sure there's no theft. I know that was a problem last time. They want to make sure I'm not stealing cars and this and
Sure.
that. That's what the background check's for.
That was one of
Make sure I don't have a record.
concerns. Would you consider 2 weeks?
Yeah, I have
and
no
make it a
problem in
motion?
two weeks,
And
as long
who
as we
seconded it?
were able to
Yeah.
get all this figured out.
2 weeks?
That's fine. Second. Mind you ask, would 2 weeks suffice, do you think, for the neighborhood groups? Amy?
Okay, all right. Motion to table is for 2 weeks?
It was motion and seconded to table Council Memo 80-14 to the March 4th council meeting. Councilman McFarland?
Aye?
Councilman Morris?
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk?
Aye.
Councilman Turk?
Aye.
Councilman Girl?
Aye.
Councilman Hugg?
Aye.
Mayor Girani?
Aye.
Motion
Let's
carried.
table to the next meeting.
Okay,
Meet
thank you.
with Amy.
The resolutions, Council Memo 82-14, a resolution authorizing the sale of property located at 5504 Selma Street. It's recommended said resolution be adopted.
So moved. Second.
Mayor, Mr. Jeff Gregory is here this evening
Okay,
to
all right.
present some information about
Where's,
this subject site.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council and staff. I am Jeff Gregory, the owner of Realty Executive Success, and I have tonight the soon-to-be proud property owner of the property that was described to you. I met Mia and her little son, Zaire, about 6 months ago, and Zaire became my new best friend. I was kind of hoping he would be here tonight so he could lead the show, because trust me, he would, as most 2-year-olds would. But sometimes when you see a house, you know exactly who it's going to be suitable for. We did have our open house, and Mia wasn't able to attend the open house, but she did check out the house a couple of days later. And just like the people that I've worked with before her, the neighborhood stabilization program has made such a difference in the life of this family. And I'll tell you, looking at the type of house that this is, it's absolutely beautiful. The work that our contractors did was amazing. And it certainly made this type of home affordable, and it gave incentives for her to be a long-term homeowner in the city of Joliet. So truly, it's a win-win proposition for us. So I would like Mia Miles to meet all of you and say a few words. She's kicking me because I didn't give her advance notice to write a speech, but I told her we wanted to come from the heart. So you're going to hear, I'm kind of nervous, but you're going to hear from her now.
Good evening.
Aye.
As he just told you, my name is Emia Miles. I have a son that's 2. I'm a correctional officer, been with this state for 6 years September. I just want to say thank you. This program has meant a lot for my son and I. And sorry I can't say more because I was not prepared, but thanks.
Thank you. Good luck and welcome. Yes. Hey, Jeff? Do you have off the top of your head how many homes we've done this with over
I
the?
believe this is number 17.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And you know what? I haven't had a chance to talk with the new city manager yet, but I do want to say and take every opportunity, Alfredo and his staff in the Neighborhood Services Department are just astounding to work with. The customers always speak so highly of them, and they're so conscientious in the work they do. So none of this would be possible without the great staff that we have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
It was motion and seconded to approve. Councilman Morris?
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk?
Aye, good luck.
Councilman Turk?
Aye.
Councilman Girl?
Congratulations on your new home. I vote aye.
Councilman Hug?
Ms. Miles, welcome to you and your son. I vote aye.
Councilman McFarland?
Aye.
Mayor Durrani?
Aye.
Motion carried. Council Memo 83-14, a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a paratransit local share agreement with PACE and to apply for grant funds available under Title 20 of the Social Security Act. It is recommended said resolution be adopted.
So
Jim?
moved.
Brief explanation, Jim?
Yeah, sure. The city enters into a, what's called a local share agreement with PACE and the Suburban Bus Division of the Regional Transportation Authority to provide transportation for persons with disabilities and those over age 60 who cannot drive. And this is a curb-to-curb advance reservation bus. So they can call and say, I need to get to the grocery store this afternoon, and they'll say, well, somebody will be there at 1:30. How long do you need to stay? About an hour and a half. Okay, well, they'll be there in an hour and 45 minutes. So they work it into their circuits, but it's very close to having taxi service through the PACE program. So the grant does require, the grant is through Social Security, Title 20, and requires a 25% match from the city.
Very good.
It was motioned. I believe we need a second.
This motion's there a second?
Second.
Sure.
Amy Sanchez again, 110 Fost Avenue. And this time I come speaking on behalf of Senior Suites of Joliet, where I'm the property manager here downtown Joliet. And some of my residents, actually, Mr. Jackson, Kendall Jackson, came down to speak with them because they have some concerns that they're not always getting service by the Title 20. So I just asked, as we move this, if city staff can look into making certain that my building services senior 62 or better, and sometimes they're not able to get through to the services, and sometimes they're saying there's just not enough opportunity. So if we could just make certain that the city is paying a large match to this and that the seniors are getting that adequate service. So they've had some challenges getting the Title 20 services.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Will do. Krista?
It was motioned and seconded to approve. Councilman Otterkirk?
Aye.
Councilman Turk?
Aye.
Councilman Girl?
Aye.
Councilman Hug?
Aye.
Councilman McFarland?
I vote aye, and I'd like to note the fact that the fare is not going up.
Councilman Morris?
Aye.
Mayor Durrani?
Aye.
Motion carried. Council Memo 84-14, a resolution approving an intergovernmental cooperation agreement between the City of Joliet and the County of Will for the expansion of the Joliet Arsenal Enterprise Zone. It is recommended said resolution be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions?
Just clarification, Mayor.
Sure.
Jim, you mind clarify? I'll break it down simple. This is really the only incentive, the advantage of what would help Center Point 2 would be with state incentives. But they need us to do this to attain those state incentives.
That's right. This is
Local
not,
tax remains.
that's right. It doesn't change whatsoever for the city of Joliet.
Thank you.
Krista?
It's motion and seconded to approve. Councilman Turk?
Aye.
Councilman Girl?
Aye.
Councilman Hug?
Aye.
Councilman McFarland?
Aye.
Councilman Morris?
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk?
Aye.
Mayor Durrani?
Aye.
Motion carried. Bids and contracts under award of contracts. Council Memo 86-14, award a contract for the Joliet Multimodal Regional Transportation Center Bid Package 2C Temporary Platform and Ticket Office. Council Memo 87-14, award a contract for the Amico Road CSXT Railroad Crossing Widening. Council Memo 88-14, approve a professional services agreement for 2014 geotechnical investigations. Council Memo 89-14, award a contract and approve payment number 1 and final to ComEd for utility pole relocation work at New Lenox and Cherry Hill Road. Council Memo 90-14, award a contract for the purchase of replacement parts for the number 2 primary tanks at the East Side Wastewater Treatment Plant. Council Memo 91-14, approve a professional engineering services agreement for the West Side Wastewater Treatment Plant SCADA project. Council Memo 92-14, award a contract for the water main extension. Council Memo 93-14, purchase motorized actuators for the Black Road Lift Station. Council Memo 94-14, purchase scanners for automated fingerprint identification system. It is recommended Council Memos 86 through 94-14 be approved.
So moved.
Second.
Any question on any of those? Krista?
It's motion and seconded to approve. Councilman Grohl.
Aye.
Councilman Hug.
Aye.
Councilman McFarland.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk.
Aye.
Councilman Turk.
Aye.
Mayor Durrani.
Aye.
Motion carried. Amendments, change orders, and payments. Council Memo 96-14, approve change order number 3 and payment request number 11 for the 2012 electrical maintenance assistance contract. Council Memo 97-14, approve payment of snow removal, February 1st and 5th, 2014. Council Memo 98-14, approve payment for emergency repair of frozen water services. It is recommended Council Memos 96 through 98-14 be approved.
So moved.
Second?
Questions? Krista?
Was motion and seconded to approve. Councilman Hug.
Aye.
Councilman McFarland.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Otterkirk.
Aye.
Councilman Turk.
Aye.
Councilman Girl.
Aye.
Mayor Durrani.
Aye.
Motion carried. Next, Mayor Durrani appointments.
I do not have any this evening.
Next, under citizens to be heard, John Sheridan of 1122 North Center Street.
I'd like to have Georgine Williams go first, please.
Sure.
Georgine Williams, 811 Elizabeth Street, Joliet. I would like to give my minutes to John Sheridan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
John Sheridan, 1122 North Center Street. Mr. Mayor, City Council, thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight. I'm here tonight to talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is an English metaphorical idiom for an obvious truth that is either being ignored or going unaddressed. It's based on the idea that an elephant in a room would be impossible to overlook. Thus, people in the room who pretend the elephant is not there have chosen to avoid dealing with the looming big issue. I believe everyone here tonight knows the looming big issue I'm talking about. It's the absence councilperson for District 4. It appears that nobody wants to talk about it publicly or take any action to correct the situation. As Wayne Horn reported in the Joliet Times Weekly on 12904, the City Council has been courteously silent about District 4 Councilwoman Susie Barber's absence. And I might add, the residents have been courteously silent. He also stated District 4 residents have not raised any public comment regarding their representative. That's about to change tonight. Mr. Horn later reported on 2/5, a total of 169 days have passed since Barber last attended the City Council or assigned committee meeting with no explanation when she will return. It's now 183 days, and enough is enough. Our Cunningham Neighborhood Council and other residents of District 4 believe it's time for the Mayor and City Council to address this issue publicly. Someone needs to grab the bull by the horns and get the situation behind us. Listen very closely. We are the taxpayers of Joliet, sitting right here tonight, that pay $20,000 a year, from what I hear, for our councilperson's salary. We believe we have a right to expect some type of personal service to our districts in return, and I don't believe that's asking for too much. The District 4 had no representation during the selection process of the new city manager, 2014 budget preparation, 2014 short-term, long-term strategy session last week, just to mention a few items in a short month or two. Our CNC group has been around for 3 years, and our councilperson attended only one meeting. I doubt that Forest Park, Collins Street, Fairmont, Parkwood, St. John's neighborhood councils have had not much success seeing their councilperson on a regular basis. Again, enough is enough. Just how long do you think any other employer in Joliet would allow this to go on in their business without putting their employee on long-term disability? All I keep hearing is there's nothing we can do. This issue has presented some opportunities for the city of Joliet to fix some problems that have come to the surface. I have done some research on this issue, and there are a few things that can be done. First, we need to fix a few things. First and foremost, there's no formal job description for the mayor's position, the city council's position listed in our city ordinances. Chapter 2, Administration of Joliet Ordinance, does go into detail for the positions of city manager, city clerk, city trustee, and the list goes on and on. But nothing can I find on the mayor's position and city council's position. Interesting enough, I did find duties of mayor pro tem under section 2.3. Go figure. This ordinance I propose for elected officials and their job duties is important for several reasons. The council person would know right up front what is expected of them, their term limit, salary, benefits, duties and power, regular meetings, special meetings, committee meetings, order of business, rules of procedure, etc., etc. More importantly, the ordinance would also address the filling of a vacancy in the event of job duties are not fulfilled. The term, upon faithful performance of their duties, should mean something when you are sworn into your job. Second, I propose the city of Joliet needs to develop a city ordinance for the recall of elected officials. Before you tell me it can't be done, I suggest you refer to the city of Downers Grove and their successful recall of a member of their city council back in 2010 of November. Their recall ordinance made history in the state of Illinois. Since then, several other cities, such as Arlington Heights, adopted similar ordinances, some easier to achieve than others. We may or may not be able to use it at this time, but it will be in place for future situations. Currently in Joliet, Article 1, in general, Section 2-21, attendance by members of boards and commissions allow for removal of individuals serving on those boards and commissions who do not attend regular meetings. All you need is a majority vote of the city council to remove them. Yet, we have nothing for the important positions of mayor and city council. What's wrong with that picture? I'm available to work with the legislative committee and/or city attorney on issues I've discussed here tonight for a nominal fee of maybe a cup of coffee. In summary, the mayor and city council need to take a leadership role and adopt an ordinance on elected officials and their job duties like several other cities have done. This is not rocket science. It's very straightforward. Put in print what you do. In addition, the city needs to adopt a recall ordinance and, more importantly, report back to the citizens of Joliet when all this work is completed. Sorry, but we need to see more follow-up from our elected officials because sometimes things don't get done if you don't. These requests fall under transparency in government and should not be a problem for anyone sitting on the bench in front of me tonight. You should not be afraid to embrace this concept. The city council should look into creating a new ordinance that would allow the mayor to appoint a temporary council person to fill the seat in District 4 until the council person returns from the illness or until the next election, whichever comes first. This should be very easy to get done. At the very minimum, as suggested by a dear friend of both Susie and I, the mayor and a few council members should make an appointment with Susie and have a very open, frank discussion about the situation and the frustration of the District 4 residents. No one-on-ones. Send a group of friends. You might consider buying her lunch. And finally, to Councilwoman Susie Barber, if you truly love the city of Joliet and truly care for the residents of District 4, I'm sure you do, then we call upon you to please consider submitting your resignation for the good of your constituents. We both know District 4 residents need to have someone actively representing them on the city council. They need a voice, and more importantly, they need a vote. You need to spend all your time on getting better and dealing with your health issues. Your health and my health and everyone's health in this room tonight is far more important than any part-time job. We wish you well. We will continue to pray for your complete recovery. Please, Susie, it's time to do the right thing. Thank you for your time.
Jeff? want to address what we can do and cannot do as far as Susie's situation.
A lot of what John suggested is things that you can do in terms of meeting and discussing the situation with Ms. Barber, and I know that's been done with herself and her family, and those discussions certainly can continue. So that approach is within the council's discretion. Some of the other ideas mentioned by Mr. Sheridan are things the city can initiate, but could not accomplish under its own authority. For example, the manner in which elected officials serving on the council are selected or how their terms are terminated, that's all governed by state law. As a home rule unit of government, we're a city of more than 25,000 in population. We have the authority to change a lot of state law as it pertains to our government and affairs, but when it comes to our form of government, and nothing is more central to the form of government than how the council is constituted, changes of that magnitude require concurrence by the Joliet voters in a referendum. So the city council can certainly make official proposals and put things on the ballot. That's within your discretion, but you do not have the authority to just, with 5 votes, make it so. So the law gives you a slightly higher responsibility and burden than some of the ideas that we've heard here, but the council can certainly move in that direction should it deem it the appropriate course of action.
Can this council enact a law, ordinance, whatever, that if a member of this council or the mayor misses so many unexcused meetings that they can be removed?
My answer would be the city council can establish rules governing its members and has certain steps that it can take to sanction members for violation of the rules. I do not believe expulsion from the council for missing meetings, for example, is within its authority. That divests the voters of their decision that was made in an open election, and that would require either approval through a referendum or some other process followed by state law. And it's my opinion that the council does not currently have the authority to expel members through a rulemaking process. You do have the rulemaking process authority, just how far can you go for violations of that process? That's the question.
Any other questions?
Mayor? Sure. I currently enjoy the position of Mayor Pro Tem, so as apparently the only well-defined member of this council.
At this time.
At this time. I would strongly suggest, and I feel bad that I hadn't noticed that, what Mr. Sheridan has shared with us is a 150-year-old plus city. Jeff, can we put together a specific, how do we go about doing that? A specific description or definition of mayor and council members?
Legislative committee, probably. Legislative committee.
Can we move that to the legislative committee to start looking into that?
Absolutely.
The job description for a city council, it would be beneficial for the council to review what state law dictates as being the official responsibility of the mayor and members of the council. But the job description authority really is the General Assembly's. It's the state of Illinois to decide how local officers are to be selected and what the scope of their powers are to be. And that really is what a job description is all about. What the city can do is bring some life to some of the dry language in the Illinois Municipal Code that does describe the limits of authority and the job description, if you will, for the mayor and members of the city council. It's written, the municipal code is 55 years old, about, and written by lawyers, for lawyers, thank God, and it's not completely understandable and easy to read.
That's a foregone conclusion.
Well, And so I think it certainly is a valid suggestion to help members of the community buy into the political system by understanding what it is you do, how you're selected, what your terms of office are, what your customary responsibilities are, what the limits of your authority are, what the limits of your jurisdiction might be. If there's a problem with the court system, is this where you go? Or do you go to another unit of government? If there's a problem with the park district, is City Hall the place to go, or you go somewhere else? That type of public education function, which I think is at the core of the job description suggestion, is certainly a valid idea and something you can do. I just want to state that for the record, technically, the job descriptions are written in Springfield, not Joliet.
But we can, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one other statement. Mr. Sheridan, rest assured, I haven't looked at our description or the state's description in depth, but I do assure you it does not include me shoveling your driveway. Okay. There you go. Now, did the community, as a community group, has there been community representatives that met with Councilwoman Barber? I'm just throwing that out there.
All District 4 community organizations have reached out to her to try to meet on several occasions.
How did you do that, Amy?
I'm sorry?
How?
By phone, by text message, by email, through City Hall. Okay. We've all reached out to her in the past couple of years. We've on several occasions.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? I would suggest that the legislative committee look at job descriptions that the state has, and maybe if they can add, like Jeff said, some things to make it representative of our jobs. Okay. Just for the record, I have reached out to Susie more than one time and talked to her, and she does say she probably should step down, but so far. Okay. We will take John's idea, maybe go with a visitor. I don't know. We'll see. Who's next?
Roger Thompson has
Roger?
removed his name from the agenda.
Okay. All right.
Next is new business not for final action or recommendation.
Anything? Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to change the topic here, talk a few minutes about Evergreen Terrace tonight. Prior to the meeting, I passed out a letter which was sent to our city manager on June 3rd of 2013. It was a settlement offer that was made by Ungaretti and Harris, and I want to discuss that as well as a couple other issues. Just to clarify, what is spurring these comments tonight, and what I hope is an open discussion, has been since 2011 when I was elected, this issue's been discussed a lot by the council in private and closed executive session. And I think because of that, and it was done, I think, for valid reasons, there was pending litigation with the federal government. But because of that, I think an incorrect picture has been given to the public about where we stand with Evergreen Terrace. I've been asking for at least a year, I've been asking for staff to put together a plan. What happens if we're successful with the litigation? If we win, if we find the funds to buy Evergreen Terrace, what's the plan? And obviously, any original plan that would have been in place when this first was initiated has really gone out the window with the federal settlement. We now are in a whole different ballgame. So, I asked a few months ago, I think in December at a meeting, I asked if staff had a plan, if they could explain, give us a real feasible, workable solution to some of these, I think, basic questions, considering the amount of money that we're spending and potentially we could spend. It still hasn't happened. I will say I've met in private with various neighborhood group members, and I think some of them have put together excellent ideas, and I would suggest whoever is in charge of this, and I'm not sure if anybody is at this point, but to reach out to some of these members, and I'd be happy to try to facilitate that. I think there are some ideas out there that may make sense. But because nobody has come forward and nobody is presenting anything to me or anyone else on the council, I started looking into some issues myself, and I've uncovered a couple things that I think need to be talked about publicly. And I want to thank city staff. I've sent requests out in the last few weeks, and they've cooperated in a timely manner. The first issue that I think we need to discuss is the amount of legal fees that we've spent in this case. This council and I haven't reviewed every executive session. I have reviewed a couple, and I have notes from them. But we were led to believe when these questions were asked, where are we at, how much money have we spent on Evergreen Terrace, the figure of $2 million had been floated several different times. And I publicly had said $2 million to Chicago attorneys. What I found out last week was that the real number at this point is $4.6 million. That's just for litigation, which hasn't been concluded. I don't think we're anywhere near concluding. There's phase one of a trial, which we are still in the process. If we win phase one, we will go to phase two, which will be a second trial to determine the price of Evergreen Terrace. And I believe, and I think Mr. Plyman would agree, that there probably is an appeal which will be filed at the end of phase two if we're successful. So right now, we have 4.6 million into this. There doesn't seem to be any top-end number, any end in sight. My understanding was at the beginning of this litigation or early on in the process, the city council had put aside $3.5 million in an Evergreen Terrace fund. Obviously, that money's depleted at this point. We're through the $3.5 million, which was being put aside to actually buy the property, and we're already $1 million over. So a couple questions which I think need to be answered, and the first one would be, where is this money coming from? A second question would be, how much are we anticipate to spend, without being too complicated, in the year 2014? And where is that money coming from? How are we going to pay for this? And I'm not asking for a global answer. I'm asking for a specific answer next month for the rest of this year. Where is this money coming from to pay for this?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the expenses for Evergreen Terrace, which began in 2005 when the city council voted unanimously to file a condemnation lawsuit and to defend itself in a discrimination lawsuit that had already been filed against it by the owners of Evergreen Terrace. Those fees were paid for out of the general fund by the city, separate and distinct from the Evergreen Terrace Reserve Fund, which is the I think it was a little more than that, but approximately $3.5 million that the council separately set aside for the future for the acquisition of Evergreen Terrace. So that's where the money has come from. It's come from the general fund. I believe the former city manager made a decision sometime in 2013. I don't know, I was not consulted when that decision was made in terms of its timing. But sometime when the litigation expenses related to the trial itself, which is the most expensive part of any litigation, of course, is the trial. When those expenses began to accumulate, that's when Mr. Thanis decided to use the reserve fund and tap into the $3.5 million. I think since that time, since Mr. Thanis made that decision, $2 million was spent out of that fund. I think that's probably where the $2 million number came from, although I think based on the information that was circulated by the finance department to everybody, the $4.6 million figure is currently accurate. So that is where the money has come from. It's come from a combination of the general fund and also from a reserve fund that the city has consistently set aside for Evergreen Terrace purposes, even when we went through the budget battles 5 years ago in dealing with the Great Recession. That money was set aside for this project. There's approximately $1.6 million, $1.7 million left in that fund. I believe that's more than adequate to take care of the remaining litigation phases. We've been in court since September of 2012 on what we call phase one of the trial, but it basically is the core legal issues of the case, and it was unprecedented, no doubt about it. This is the biggest legal fight that Joliet has ever been in, and so with a big fight and a lot of lawyers comes litigation expense. It's unavoidable. I remember the night, I think the council was sitting here, staff was sitting towards the back of the room. The room was configured a little different, but it was October in 2005 when the council voted in open session to pursue the condemnation of Evergreen Terrace. It was Councilman Warren Doris who, after the vote, indicated to City Manager Mesra, John, get the best legal assistance you can, hire whoever you need to win this case. The council will support you. That essentially were the comments, excuse me.
If I may, I asked a question.
Yes, sir.
And in all due respect, it really wasn't directed at you. You're the legal counsel for the city. I want to address this with the policymakers, with the people who have to make this decision.
Well, the mayor asked me to
I
respond
know.
to the question,
I
so
know
I
he
did.
did. I know. So, but again, I commend Pastor Doris for what he said in 2005. That's really not what we're talking about tonight. The issue is, well, I didn't know that that was the actual number. I didn't know that we had spent 1.9 million just in last year alone. I don't know if anyone else on this council knew it. Mayor, were you aware of that number?
I was not.
It's problematic that our city is spending that kind of money and not one elected official who's in charge of making these decisions knows about it. And I think that's an issue that it transcends whether or not you agree with the Evergreen Terrace litigation or not. Nobody should be authorized to spend that money without coming through this council. And apparently that's what's happened.
The council took the position to fight Evergreen Terrace and take on this lawsuit. And until that position changes, until this council votes to change that position, that's what staff is going to continue to do.
Well, they should apprise us of what's going on, because this council wouldn't have any idea that maybe a vote to change it should take place if they don't know the facts. I think we're all entitled to the facts and know exactly where we're at. I think the people of the city are entitled to the facts. It's their money.
You're absolutely right, and you could have asked just as well as I could have asked.
I did.
And I did.
The number I was told was 2 million. It was asked numerous times.
And that was a $2 million out of the general fund.
And that was an inaccurate answer.
That was out of the general fund.
The number is 4.6 million. The second part that I'd like to bring up, it's right along the same lines. It has to do, and I passed this out to the council members. I have extra copies if anyone wants to see it. I think this should probably go on the city website. It has to do with a letter which was tendered to the city from the opposing attorneys on June 3rd of 2013. And again, a quick history lesson to get people up to speed. Since I was elected in 2011, myself and several of the new council members did ask questions about the Evergreen Terrace litigation, because this was a decision which had been made prior to us coming on the council. And again, when we talked about it in private, we wanted to know the facts to know what is the best course of action going forward. And one of the questions that was asked by myself and others on the council would be, well, what if? What if we, especially after the federal litigation, what if we decide to change course? If we stop this and get out, what would it cost us as a city? And again, I'm going to paraphrase because this was asked numerous times and there were numerous different answers, but in general, the response that we received was, we would be on the hook, we'd be responsible for the opposing party's attorney's fees. And the follow-up question was, well, how much is that? And we got a variety of answers, from 1 to 2 million to 3 to 5 million. The answers changed. We never got a solid answer. One of the points that I had made repeatedly was that you're never going to get an answer until you approach the other side and find out what that really is. The answer on paper may be $5 million, but through negotiation, you may be able to work that number down. I think what this letter from Ungaretti and Harris shows in June 3rd is that that was accurate. This was a settlement proposal that was sent to the city, and in this proposal, this, in exchange for Joliet dismissing our case, this basically would have wrapped up all litigation, including the pending federal litigation, the other lawsuits which were pending against the city. It would allow for Joliet to have a committee, a task force, that would meet on a regular basis with the owners of the property and would force the property to be maintained in a safe, secure, and healthful condition. And I think most importantly, this offer would have taken any liability away from Joliet for opposing counsel's attorney's fees. Now, I had caught wind of something along this line. I'd heard a rumor in September of this year, 3 months after this was sent to the city, that this had occurred. And I brought it up in executive session on September 17th. What I was told, what the council was told in executive session was, yes, an offer was made, but the offer was described as being something that shouldn't be taken seriously. And we were told repeatedly, and I have the quotes from my notes from going back and listening to the tape, that this offer was conditional or preconditioned on HUD paying for the attorney fees for the opposing side, and that HUD would dismiss or forgive the mortgage against Gidwitz. You can read this, and I put it in front of you, Mayor, and everybody else. That's not what this says. So again, much like the issue of fees, there's a bigger issue at play here. This was tendered to the city, and it was not tendered to the city council. And I don't know what the temperature of the council is, whether we would have pursued this or not. I guess we'll never know because we weren't privy to it. But this, I think, is the worst example of backroom dealing that I can imagine, because a decision was made by a very select group of individuals to hide this from the council and to proceed with the evergreen litigation. And none of us know what the results of that decision are going to be, but I think it's very safe to say that that decision is going to cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. And I'll explain. Right now, the legal fees for Gidwitz's attorneys are sitting at $11 million, and this isn't over. The meter's still ticking. If we are unsuccessful and lose this lawsuit, that bill becomes the city of Joliet. We had, presumably, an option to get out without paying anything. And again, it doesn't matter whether you agree with this or you want to proceed with the Evergreen lawsuit. That option needed to be brought to the council, and the council needed to make an informed, intelligent decision on this. The second part of it, when I speak of tens of millions of dollars, if we're successful, not only do we have our own attorney's fees costs, which continue to mount, we are going to have to come up with money to buy Evergreen Terrace, which could be apparently somewhere in the range of $15 million. We will have to come up with money to demolish the property if we choose to do that, which nobody on this council, I don't think in city staff, has an idea what that cost would be. We would have to come up with the money to redevelop the property. And now, because of the federal settlement, we have to come up with the money to relocate or rehouse 115 different residents. I don't know if the plan is to buy 115 houses or where in Joliet we're going to do that, and I don't know where the money's going to come from. So again, I don't want to confuse the issue, but like the first issue, this was a letter that absolutely should have been showed to the council. It should have been discussed. It should have been vetted on the council, and we should have decided whether or not we wanted to ignore this proposal and go forward, and that wasn't done. And again, Mayor, I'm addressing you because you're the leader of the council.
Mm-hmm.
Were you aware back in June that Mr. Thanis had been negotiating with Gidwitz's attorneys and that this proposal had been tendered?
No.
Was anybody on this council aware of that?
I was not. That's when you showed me this. It's the first time I saw it.
Well, it begs the question. Mr. Plyman just said that this is the biggest legal fight Joliet's ever been in, and I agree, it is. The ramifications of this are staggering. And I have to be honest, Mayor, I don't know how this could have happened without you as the mayor or someone on the council knowing that this was going on.
You're calling me a liar?
No, I'm not calling you names.
I just told you. This is the first time I saw it.
Mr. Mayor, may I throw in a couple comments?
Sure.
The letter that I provided Councilman Odekirk at his request was sent to Tom Thanis in June. And the reason it was sent to Tom Thanis is because Councilman Odekirk unilaterally went to Tom Thanis and asked Tom to please, to make an offer to the Evergreen Terrace ownership that if Joliet walked away from the case, completely just dropped everything and walked away from the case, would the ownership waive any attorney fee claim against the city. So that was, the reason why you didn't know about it is because Mr. Odekirk went directly to the city manager and asked the city manager to pursue that inquiry. The city manager did so. He got that letter. I'm not sure, Councilman, how you're reading it, but I had discussions with HUD concerning the contents of that letter. The basic thrust of that letter is, sure, Joliet, we won't look to you for what turns out to be $12 million in fees, but HUD has to pay them. Well, HUD told us during negotiations they would not waive any attorney's fees, or pay is the better word. They would not pay the attorney's fees for ownership in the case going forward. They would not do that anymore. And obviously, that's been somewhat of a difficulty for ownership because ownership apparently didn't pay their attorneys at all throughout the course of the entire case. So I think the reason why nobody on the council knew that the inquiry was made is because it was never made through the council to the city manager, to the city attorney's office, and then down the normal course of events in a settlement. It was done directly by the councilman with the city manager. I'm not sure if the city manager ever reported that letter to you.
Well, he didn't, and that's
He
why
did
I'm
not.
talking about
And I
tonight.
did not. I don't know who else knew about that letter. I knew about it. The city manager knew about it. I don't know how you would have found out about it, or what rumors you heard. I know that is exactly part of the inquiry we're currently engaged in.
Well, Jeff,
with
I
other
heard about it.
local agencies.
I
So-
heard about it through city staff that were honest enough to come to me and tell me what was going on. And I didn't make a unilateral request. I said this repeatedly in executive session, and I wasn't the only one. I think others on the council maybe should speak up.
I will step up right now.
So-
No, Jeff, actually, we did. I called for the same thing. Going back to July of 2011, I wanted an exact number on what we owed for attorneys and what ownership owed. And frankly, without divulging what the rest of the people voted, I voted against moving forward in 2011, and you'll find that on the tape. But I've kept my mouth quiet since then because the majority wished to go forward, and we
Councilman,
did.
I'm just explaining the June letter.
Okay, well,
How
let me
that
finish now. I didn't interrupt you, Jeff.
You know, I knew there were questions about attorney's fees that had been raised during closed session back in 2011 when we had new members. The best staff can do, not knowing what the other party's fees might be in the case, is to make some sort of educated guess based on what we've been paying, and then try to make an adjustment from that.
But you see, what this shows, in my opinion, and I'm not an attorney, you are, Councilman Odekirk's an attorney. I'm certainly the type of person that hires your services. I'm not an attorney. I don't see where they ask for HUD to completely waive their attorney's fees. I read this as a simpleton here. HUD shall provide rents under the HAMP agreement at levels that will be sufficient for the owners to pay the liabilities of the property and be reimbursed for all their costs and attorney's fees. Now, this is based on some fee structure that's beyond my control. That's between the Gidwits, the attorneys there, in my opinion, and HUD. What I'm most disturbed about in receiving this tonight, Jeff, and this is not directed at you, because I'm not sure who to direct it at, is we should have been shown this. Earlier, Councilman Odekirk, you were trying to remember what your word was used to describe it in executive session. They called it bogus. This is far from bogus from what I'm reading tonight. This is legitimate. Half of what's on here we already did in the settlement of the two other lawsuits recently. Most of what's left we can do, and there's a couple of things here that are completely beyond our control. And that would be any agreement on fees for rentals. That's between HUD and Gidwits. And it's something about also, too, approaching the congressional delegate. I would assume congressional delegation would be the Illinois congressional delegation. Okay, those are two, that's not completely beyond our control, but we can only approach them. I think the real issue here is, see, as Councilman Odekirk talked, here's the question that came to mind. As of June 3rd, 2013, how much did we owe? I know that we put $4.2 million of fees from 2012 through 2012 and 2013. That tells me prior to, roughly January of 2012, we owed less than $500,000. In 2 years, we put $4.2 million in legal fees. I get it when you say because that's the meat of the entire suit is the litigation itself. But if this letter had been brought to us in June of 2013, we would have considered it. Again, Councilman Odekirk certainly was correct in saying we don't know if there would have been a 5-4, 6-3, 8-0. Who knows? But we weren't given it, and that in and of itself is wrong. I don't see this to be bogus. I see it something that we should have been considered, discussed, maybe debated, looked for your counsel at the time based on what we saw. And then I wonder if we had voted to accept this agreement and HUD could have tied up whatever they needed to tie up on the Fed end that we have no control over, would we have owed $4.2 million or total bill $4.6 million as of June 2013? So the big question to me here is why this never made it to my desk until today.
Jeff, I have a question, as long as I understand. Councilman Odekirk asked Tom Thanis to contact these people to see about a settlement.
I asked in executive session, what are the numbers? I said, how can we make any informed decision if we don't know what we're looking at? This was, you check the tapes, this was said over 2 years.
That's what I'm trying to get to.
There was
You
nothing-
did ask.
there was
No, you
nothing-
asked them, okay.
Oh, there was nothing secret that went on. So
And he did in fact, and you just stated, I thought, that nobody else ever had a copy of this. Did you get a copy of this from Tom?
No, I got
How
a copy.
were you aware that it was even available?
I got a copy of this because I sent an email 2 weeks ago saying, has there ever been a written settlement proposal? And Mr. Plyman, thankfully, went and found this and sent it to me. The first time I saw it was in February 2014. And again, Mayor, I think you need to step back from the issue of how you feel about the lawsuit. That's outrageous that this would have been tendered and nobody with decision-making authority had the chance to see it.
Councilman, there are
to consider it.
three documents that were provided to you. I don't know why you chose just the one.
Because, I can answer that. The other documents, this was on letterhead from the other law firm. The other documents were unsigned, undated, and they appeared to be somebody's notes. I'm not clear whose notes they were, when they were written.
Right.
I'm answering your question. This was from Ungaretti and Harris. It was dated and it was signed. So this, I believe, is reliable. I don't know what the other documents were.
Well, I certainly could have answered that question, and now that you've asked it, they
I didn't ask
bullet-
it. I'm talking
bullet
about
point
this document, Jeff, please.
offers presented by Ungaretti and Harris.
Jeff,
Could I see them? I'd like to get a copy of those, sir.
Jeff, what, again,
Yes.
I don't want to
I think with
argue.
the old council should.
I don't,
Can I also raise another point, because there's been suggestions of information not being shared, and that was a letter that was a follow-up to a discussion between a councilman and a city manager. It's a letter from a lawyer to a city manager, but everything that was in there was discussed in a closed session meeting with the city council that was called at Councilman Odekirk's request on September 17th. We met in there. During the course of that meeting, Councilman Odekirk, apparently, according to his comments tonight, became aware of that communication in some fashion. And I did not have a copy of it with me. I'm not even sure I had it in my file at the time. Tom Thanis was present during the course of that meeting and was able to answer any questions. But I did recall the substance of the settlement offer, which is basically, if HUD will take care of the mortgage and if HUD will take care of the fees, we don't look to Joliet. And that is what that offer sheet says. Now, during the course of the summer, I spent a lot of time negotiating the federal settlement with HUD. And HUD made it absolutely clear that at the end of the litigation, some other party, whether it be Joliet or ownership, was going to pay the fees incurred by ownership and was going to pay the mortgage that they had made on the property. They were not going to take a walk and pay for both of those on behalf of the city or on behalf of ownership. That was HUD's final position, and it never changed throughout the negotiations. I had communicated that fact when I met with Ungaretti and Harris in May. And so they were aware of HUD's position. So the fact that they're trying to be courteous to the city manager and say, yeah, they'll settle, but only if A and B occur, knowing full well that A and B would never occur, that HUD was not in a position to pay for the mortgage or pay for the fees, either in a lump sum or through rents over time, which is what eventually was set forth by Ungaretti in that letter. So it was not a settlement offer that was very warmly received by the city manager, or when I heard about it, we knew it was a non-starter because it could not be accomplished given what HUD had already made very clear in the negotiations. It was a response, frankly, to deal with division among the council that they were aware of. And it weakened our hand in the litigation, and they knew that. They knew that just the request itself to forget the case and walk away was a sign of weakness to some extent, and they were exploiting that. And it was not really in our interest to allow them to benefit from that exploitation. But to say the council did not know about the substance of that letter before it approved the federal settlement, the council certainly knew on September 19th or 17th when it voted in closed session to approve it.
No, if I may real quick, Jeff, and I'm going from memory here. No, I was absolutely not made aware of the offer to not be held responsible for any of the fees. That was never discussed. You guys did discuss or present to us what you termed bogus, being that they want HUD to pay for their attorney's fees and forgive the mortgage. Now, you're the attorney, I'm just the councilman. Please explain to me where in this letter it says that HUD will pay the attorney's fees and forgive the mortgage. I don't find it.
It doesn't say that.
It's the section you read basically excuses the city of Joliet from having to pay the fees if HUD will pay for all the liabilities on the property. That means the mortgage, including the attorney's fees.
What I'm reading, Jeff, and I'm trying to understand what you're saying and what's on paper here, HUD shall provide rents, shall allow enough rent to be collected to pay for the operation of the facility, that's a given, and enough to pay down the levels in a reasonable amount of time, they didn't set a date, for liabilities of the property, mortgage, right? And for legal fees, reimbursement for the costs. Nowhere does it demand that HUD write them a check or completely forgive it. What I'm reading here is...
What they were saying essentially is jack up the rents that ownership receives at Evergreen Terrace to repay ownership for its $12 million loan and for its $12 million in attorney's fees. That's what they're saying. They're not asking for a check from HUD, other than they'd like one once a month when the rental bills are paid by HUD. So it was a rent adjustment that would recoup those amounts. Either way, it comes out of HUD's budget.
Well, since
and that's what we understood to be a non-starter for HUD. It just wasn't going to happen.
Well, shouldn't you have allowed us to decide that? You would have given us the same explanation you just gave us. And we would have talked amongst ourselves. We are lucky enough to have one attorney up here, and yourself, an accomplished attorney. I see a big problem with this never making it to us. I mean, it's not up to anybody to choose what the council sees for this information.
You know, the letter is addressed to someone, and you guys apparently were not given a copy of it. Apparently, the former manager didn't even discuss it with the councilman, even though the councilman went to him and asked for that inquiry to be initiated. I leave that to the participants in that discussion, but the substance of that letter was disclosed by myself to all of you in closed session on September 19th. There is a recording of that, and we've had a couple discussions about that. And so you did understand that an offer had been made that included those elements, including the waiver of fees if HUD would pay those. That was discussed in closed session by myself and the city manager with the full council long before you were asked to take a position with the federal settlement.
Again, as a non-lawyer, when you tell me, if that's in fact what you're recollecting from the tape, if you tell me they want HUD to pay the rents, I see a check being written. That's a far cry from sufficient rents from the tenants. That was not expressed that way, Jeff. That's why we needed to see this whole document.
Mayor, I got a question.
Councilman Turkles.
You know, going back to when this whole thing started, you know, we talked a lot with, you know, we all knew what was going on there. These residents lived in deplorable conditions. And I know you're talking about the letter, Bob, but this is kind of leading up to a little bit. But, you know, they lived in the deplorable conditions, which they were forced to live in. They had nowhere else to go. They shouldn't have had to live in those conditions. The people around the area, St. John's Neighborhood Association, St. Pat's Organization, Kappa, they were just fed up, as rightfully they should be, and other parts of the city as well. And that's when this whole thing started, and we knew it was going to be costly. You know, as far as us not knowing what the legal fees are to date, well, you know, every month we get a list of the regular disbursements and the treasurer's claims, and every bill the city pays are in those documents. And maybe in the future, we should ask staff to maybe highlight those bills or keep a running total on a monthly basis so that we can
Councilman
keep up
sounds
with
like
it.
he'll be doing that for us, but
well,
sure.
And then, and the other thing is, and like as Councilman Hugg said, he's no attorney. I'm far from an attorney. And regardless of whether this should have got to you or all of us or any of us, you know, the way I read it is 90% of the stuff in here, what they're agreeing to, means that Evergreen Terrace would go on as business as usual, which isn't acceptable. I know that's separate from what you're saying, but that's what this letter kind of tells me.
Well,
Wait a minute.
I'm sorry.
Mike, just to piggyback on what you said, I would agree if the council's intentions were to benefit the residents of Evergreen when they did this, there would be a plan in place. Since I've been on this council, I've heard in executive session, still today, what's the plan for the residents? If we are successful with actually acquiring Evergreen, what are we going to do? How are we going to better the lives of those folks? We still haven't seen that. So whether the true intentions were to benefit the residents or for some other deals, I don't know. To go back to this dog and pony show, I agree, the issue is why was a settlement offer given to the city? Whether or not, Jeff, you received it in June or 3 months later when you presented to the council in executive session, which I don't remember seeing this or hearing about this. That's the question. Why did it take 3 months? Why weren't we ever given this offer? I think the word was a bogus offer. I think there's a fiduciary duty as our attorney, and I'm not blaming you, but that you should somehow know that this was brought to the city manager in June, that there's an offer. I mean, as you said, this is the #1 legal case for the city of Joliet. And how can our chief legal counsel not know that this offer is on the table? And I'm not pointing fingers at you. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe it's even if the councilman, again, I don't know how one councilman has the power to dictate the city manager to do whatever. It should be consensus. Should have been discussed in executive session as a consensus to go and do a agreement with the opposing sides, right, attorneys. I mean, that's another question.
Councilman, can I clarify something? It is true that Councilman Odekirk went to the city manager with the request for an inquiry to ownership. The city manager had that discussion without my participation, got the answer. The city manager did inform me of the substance of that letter. I was aware of that. We both reviewed it and agreed that it was not a serious offer because it depended on conditions which were impossible to satisfy and really was intended to divide the council further on Evergreen Terrace during the middle of a trial. That letter is a trial trick that Ungaretti and Harris tried to pull on the city of Joliet. It is not a serious offer. They knew it would never be accepted by HUD. It was intended to divide and conquer. Now, it's already divided. I don't know if it will conquer, but that's what that was all about. So to say I was unaware of it, I don't know if you picked that up from tonight's comments. I certainly became aware of it after Tom received it. I don't know if Tom circulated it to Councilman Odekirk or to others. I'm hearing that he didn't.
So could you just answer one more question? In the first sentence, it says, "Dear Tom, in our phone discussion Friday afternoon relating to settlement matters, you raised a new approach." So evidently, when I read that, the city manager is trying to negotiate a way out. Am I correct?
Well, yes, you are correct. Councilman Odekirk.
Hold on, Jeff.
Well, hold on.
No, you keep telling.
Your new approach
You keep talking about a conversation I had with the city manager that you weren't privy to. I had a lot of conversations with the city manager about this and other city business. And if you wanted to throw the contents of the conversation out there, he agreed that Evergreen Terrace was a bad deal and that we need to get out of it. What he did with that's what he told me. And so what he did with Ungaretti and Harris, I don't know because it was never reported back to me. But if you're going to claim that you don't know if I had a copy of this or not, I clearly didn't because I raised the issue 3 months later when I first heard about it. And again, I don't want to throw stones. That's not what I'm trying to do tonight. But I'll say it again. Whatever your opinion is about Evergreen Terrace, and I know the council's divided, that's not the issue. The issue is that as council members, we needed to know. You're saying what this really means. I read it differently, and I'm an attorney too. I read that the statute requires attorney's fees, and this is language that could get past the judge and supersede the statute. That's what I read. Whether I'm right or you're right is really not the point. The point is we needed to know this.
No, that is the point.
No, it's not.
The agreement
We needed to
clearly
know.
required that HUD, the offer to waive the attorney fee claim against the city is completely dependent on HUD paying the fees through some sort of rent accommodation that HUD had to agree to. And also, there's a mortgage accommodation through the rent as well. That's clearly part of the offer.
There's 11 points to this offer. That's one of the 11 points,
Well,
Jeff.
that's the part that, because of prior discussions that I participated in with HUD and had communicated to Ungaretti and Harris, I recognize because of that they knew HUD could not agree to that. And because we knew HUD could not agree to it, there was nowhere to go with that offer. Today, now that you have the letter, we could still not get HUD to agree to that. We could not do it. HUD will not accept those terms. They made it very clear when we negotiated the settlement this summer. And the city manager knew that, and I knew that, And as we evaluate, Unready knew that too because we communicated that to them. And that's why when we received that communication, that letter, that offer, we recognize it for what it was, which was a device that would operate in this room, really. It wasn't a serious business proposal. It was a way to deal with you people. That's really what it comes down to. That's what that is.
Mayor? Jeff, I don't know if all of us, and maybe some in the audience or watching on television, remember the very highly controversial detention center situation. And we had some heated discussions about that, correct? And at one of the discussions right here, the city manager said, I only tell you the things I think are important you need to know. And we made it clear prior to this June 3rd date, no, we're the council, you need to tell us everything. All right? So you can't speak for the former city manager, why he didn't do it. I am a little, concerned that once he did tell you about it and provided you with it, you didn't, as our council, bring it into an executive session. Mike, you made a couple of good points, but to answer your one question about deplorable conditions continuing, it says right there, owners will meet regularly with a Joliet task force to maintain the property in a safe, secure, and healthful condition.
And that's been done for years, Larry.
Yes.
There's been tenant and ownerships and.
No, City of Joliet.
I know, and
we're
it's
going to
been
have
done.
oversight.
It's okay, but.
And what I see in this offer,
Didn't
as
work
bogus as some
before.
people might say it is, everything we want through the lawsuit is in here except ownership.
No,
Everything else we want is in here.
Councilman, the reason why we litigated or initiated the condemnation is because for years, Joliet had a struggle with a property that was controlled by someone not of this community that had no real, did not care about the community's wishes and how the property was operated, did not care the level of police calls, didn't care about the level of 911 calls, the number of false alarms, didn't care about the neighborhood services violations, the crimes, the drug sales, didn't care about any of that so long as the check was coming in. And so what the council decided in 2005 is the only change that was possible at that time was to get control of the site through condemnation or through purchase. Purchase didn't work, condemnation was the only alternative. Ownership is not the key to the Evergreen Terrace puzzle. Really, it's control of the site. The problem with that is with current ownership, you don't have control. You never will have control. We have a track record now that shows that ownership and management really doesn't care about our local ordinances or about our community at all. It's had enough time to get its act together. We've seen what it can do. And while the heat's on, it does a little better in performance, but the heat won't always be on, especially if we drop the case and turn away. And then where will we be with control on Evergreen?
And if I might
we will be nowhere.
If I might interject, Jeff, this is policy.
Yeah.
This is policy. And, things changed over the years. First of all, Evergreen Terrace is no longer the highest crime rate for that area. There's another apartment complex, which I'm not going to name publicly here, that's higher crime rate. Do we condemn that next? See, these are questions we need to answer. Legally, what you just did is great, but I don't want all of us to dance around one thing. I got this tonight, and it's over 8 months old. If there was ever a chance, and you're saying, Larry, trust me, there wasn't. Not that I don't trust you, I would have liked to have seen it back then. And I think as our attorney, as your client, you have the obligation to bring it to us, or the former city, somebody had the obligation to bring this to us. And it never made it to us till tonight.
Well, I just want the public to know that that offer was discussed at length with the full city council on September 19th, or excuse me, 17th. And that was a meeting I'll never forget. It lasted a couple of hours and got pretty loud, and we covered the waterfront. And at the end of that meeting, rather than talk about an offer that Councilman Overkirk just heard about, we went through the proposed federal settlement, which you guys had not formally approved yet. And after you heard all the terms, I think it was unanimously, or at least without any dissenting votes, agreed to bring it to open session for a vote and for approval. So it was a heck of a meeting. It was the meeting at which time the federal settlement was approved, and we talked about this in detail. And so, to say the letter wasn't before you is one thing, but to say you didn't know what the offer consisted of, that's a different matter. And certainly, the council had opportunities to delay action or ask other questions or look for other documents, but it was, I thought, totally satisfied with the explanations that staff provided regarding that offer back on September 17th.
And I understand that, Jeff, but you made a good statement there, delay actions and look for more documents. I think it's inappropriate for the city council to play the Easter egg hunt with city staff. What do we mean, look? It should have been presented to us. This document should have been given. It's that simple. There's no defending it.
Yeah, I was satisfied.
Excuse me, if I may. Can I get a chance here?
Yeah.
Okay. Jeff has been up in Chicago, I don't know how many times, negotiating this agreement. And I remember discussing some of this, but I also remember him saying that the owners want HUD to pay or us to pay the attorney fees and pay for the property. And my feeling was, no, we're not going to do that. Now, I've been up here 17 years. Prior to that, I spent 16 years negotiating with Jeff across the bargaining table. I have all the faith in the world in that man. And if he sits here and tells us that's what this consisted of, I believe him. I think his integrity, his honesty is beyond reproach. And maybe he should have actually passed out this letter. Did we actually get this letter? Absolutely not. Were we told of some of the contents? Yes, I remember that. And I also remember him saying that the owners as I stated before, wanted either us or HUD to pay for the attorney fees and pay to purchase the property, and that would not fly with us. So maybe we should have got a copy of this. We didn't. But if Jeff's sitting up there and telling us this is what happened, and I want to see the other two notes that you offered that Councilman Odekirk didn't bring.
Well, again, I didn't bring them because I don't know what they were. They were sheets of paper that were typed up. So I don't know if
By who?
I don't know.
They were provided to us by Ungaretti and Harris. It was their.
I'll be honest, I assumed they were Tom Thanis's notes. There's no name attached to it. I have no idea.
You asked me
what they
for
were.
settlement offers submitted by Owners Council, and that's what you got. You didn't get anything different, but I'll certainly provide it to everybody, and you can draw your own conclusions. You got to remember, what I provided Councilman Odekirk was a set of 3 offers that ownership had submitted to us. And they weren't completely incremental. I believe the one that Councilman Odekirk circulated tonight was more in response to Councilman Odekirk's request of the city manager. But the 3 were a course of conduct, a course of dealings. And whenever ownership attempted to settle the case, and this was unlike our dealings with HUD. With HUD, it was about business. It was about, ownership of the site, redevelopment of the site, tenant protections, things that made sense. And it was something that the city and HUD had the ability to negotiate and enter into agreements on and implement. When we negotiated with ownership, it wasn't about money necessarily. It was about going to Washington, D.C. and contacting Speaker Boehner and Senator Durbin and cooking up some weird high-level federal political deal, at the end of which time ownership was going to be excused from paying millions of dollars in mortgage liabilities and attorney's fees. So their proposal for settlement had nothing to do with the tenants or with the litigation so much as it had to do with getting the federal political system to bend over backwards for their personal interests. That was their settlement model. And you'll see that when I released what I gave the Councilman Odekirk to everybody else. And it was not, in my opinion, a very reasonable course of action. If you really want to settle a case, and I've settled dozens of cases for the city, some union contracts with Councilman Durant, and normally you have some business points and there's a universe of things that belong in the deal and some that don't. But when it was being suggested to the city that the best way out of this mess is to cut some deal in Washington, D.C. With Speaker Boehner and with senior leadership in the federal Capitol, that made no sense to me. That's not, especially when the output was Joliet still pay full market value for the property, but ownership gets relieved of the mortgage and all their attorney's fees. None of that made sense. That benefited them, but it really was, and during the course of that, Joliet was required to suspend its negotiations with HUD. Again, made no sense. We're very deeply involved in discussions with HUD, and that's who we had to settle this case with, and we ultimately did. So when you look at the course of dealings between the city and ownership and their council, they were really asking to take us on a journey that took us a long way out of the way to get to a good deal. And it didn't look to make any sense to me, and it asked us to do some things that are just highly unusual.
Mayor, just one comment,
Sure.
please. My comments have nothing to do about integrity. My comments are about the legal obligation that any offer that is brought to the city is presented to the council. I just want to clarify that.
I think we should all be in agreement on that. I don't think that's controversial.
No, I don't either, but
Integrity's being thrown out there. I think
Okay.
at the end of the day, it's the
Well-
legal obligation
I agree.
to bring forth any settlement. And is there any other settlements that were presented that we have not received in the last 5 years? And that's the bigger question, and I'm sure that if there were, I'd assume they were brought to us.
The reason I brought up integrity is because, the other two pieces of paper that Jeff gave Councilman Odekirk, Bob said there was no name on it. And if Jeff says it was part of the agreement, I believe it.
Well,
It don't
Mayor-
have to, wait a minute.
Mayor, you
It
can
don't
read-
have to, it don't have to have their name on it.
Well,
And if I was, even if I was given this with the added information that we would have to pay for their attorney fees and to buy the property, or HUD would have to, I still wouldn't have agreed to this.
Well, Mayor,
no
your
amendment
question,
on it.
your question, my integrity, this is, again, I know you're not an attorney. It says settlement, attorney's fees, and costs. Nowhere in here does it reference other pages of notes. This is the complete settlement offer. So again, other documents were given that didn't have any, wasn't on letterhead like this is, wasn't signed, wasn't dated. I thought they were the city manager's notes. You're saying they were Ungaretti's notes. I don't know whose notes they were. But I know what this says, and you could read this for yourself. So it's not a question of integrity, it's a question of policy. And that's why early on, I asked Jeff, I want this to be amongst the policymakers, not amongst the attorney. And I know, Jeff, you have 8 years of work into this or more, so you're tied to this, you want it to happen. But, I think I made my point, I don't want to beat a dead horse at this point. This should never happen, because some people unilaterally made a decision that could cost the city, probably will cost the city millions of dollars. And that's a decision this council needs to make. That was my point with that and with the amount of legal fees that nobody on this council knew about.
All I'm saying is this: if Jeff says that the other two pieces of paper he give you refer to this as part of the agreement,
They don't.
I believe Jeff.
They don't.
Well, Jeff says they do.
He didn't say that.
Let's be clear.
Yeah.
Settlement negotiations have a lot of back and forth, right? Especially once you reach a point where you're pretty sure there's going to be a deal. The lawyers get to work, and there's drafts that go back and forth, and you have several versions of documents before you get to a final offer. And, it's never been a requirement of the city council that you see every draft of every settlement document. That's never been done in this case or any other case, or in union contracts. That's never been done. So to say that this potentially preliminary settlement document should have been given to the council, well, that would have been the first time that such a document would have been released to the council, because those things generally aren't. Now, final documents are, summaries of final documents are, and those were provided to the council in this case and other people in this case. But to say that a preliminary settlement offer from the ownership should go to all the council, that's not our practice. You've never asked the legal department to provide you with that level of information. And let me also add that apparently someone on the council knew about it on September 17th and didn't ask for it. So if there's any concern about the content of a written document, we certainly could have discussed it then, all right? That could have been done on September 17th, and it wasn't, for whatever reason. Instead, we went ahead with a complete explanation of the communication we received from Ungaretti and Harris. Very thorough, and it took a couple hours to complete. And if there are any questions or need for documents, any member of the council could have asked at that time, and it didn't happen. So to say now, in February, 5 months after that meeting occurred, that a document should have been submitted, even though it's not our practice to do that, I don't think that's wholly appropriate. Whether it's couched in terms of my integrity or professional ethics, it's not appropriate. That it's not an appropriate suggestion to make that the dealings that my office has had in this case, in communing with the council, are different than any other case that we've ever had. That's simply not true, even though this is a big case. And let me also emphasize that the council was aware of that settlement communication, and any one of you could have asked for it if there was a problem with our explanation, whether it was my explanation or the city manager's explanation. So I think that needs to be in the record. You're going to have the opinion and position that you choose to have, but I think the record at least should be complete.
Any other comments?
Yes.
Who said yes? Oh.
This is a public conversation, so I'm assuming the public is welcome to speak too. And I tread on leery ground to even walk up to this podium. But I'd like to recall your attention to an email that was sent out to all city council members and the city manager, as well as the corporate council, on February the 10th on behalf of Unity CDC's board president, Mac Willis, in reference to the Evergreen Terrace. I know that, and I totally respect the city council. I grew up on a bench since 1989 watching this council work and the council before it work. I respect the positions that you all hold, and I totally understand the ethics and the policies behind it, but I'm almost trembled here because I remember too much and too many promises by the management company of Evergreen Terrace to correct issues that haven't gone. Specifically in 1991, Jimmy Anderson, who was visiting his girlfriend and child at Evergreen Terrace, held down a job, walked there to babysit and take care of his son there, and he was shot. And after that, Pastor Doris, Pastor Singleton, respectfully met with several members of the management company, the police department. I remember just a couple of years ago, the woman that was shot by her abusive husband, and the baby now has hearing problems indefinitely because she was shot right there while she was holding her baby. Let's not forget, while we're going through all of our legal parts of it and everything that's going on, that there are real life human beings, women and children, men trying to take care of their children. There's a real factor. Not only that, but the neighboring communities that have suffered from the violence because of their lack of management and productivity to work with the police department. I remember the police officer who literally had his gun taken away from him, almost taken away from him while he was working a union job there, and being literally beaten up and jumped by several hoodlums there because the management company refused to do what the city of Joliet and the police department have asked them to do over the years. So let's not forget, as we're going through all the fine lines and the legalities of everything, let's not forget what the heart and soul of this is the people that live there in the surrounding communities. Our own Billy Leckmeyer got robbed at gunpoint from some hoodlum that presumably was coming out of Evergreen Terrace. So we don't want to forget the heart and soul of what this is all about. Please don't forget the residents that live there and the betterment that we want to have for them.
Your Honor.
Mayor?
Just in reference to something Amy said, everything she says is right on. Despite what criminal activity is going on there and in the surrounding neighborhood, they talked in here about setting up a task force to maintain the property in a safe, secure, healthy condition. Our inspectors would go in there on a routine basis and come out with hundreds of violations. Ownership took no responsibility. They didn't clean it up whatsoever. The only thing they did do, I think at one point in time, they did change management companies.
They promised the former city manager they would as part of an administrative hearing and never implemented that promise.
So that never happened either. So we couldn't put any faith in this. But, I have complete faith in Jeff Plyman. If whether this was presented to us or not, if he felt it was a serious offer, I'm sure he would have, I know he would have given it to us. But, we could talk here for the next 2 hours, and it's not going to change anybody's opinion. So I think what we need to do is agree to disagree and move on.
Mayor?
Yeah.
Amy, first of all, we have two issues going on here. We have an internal issue about whether or not this should be considered a legitimate offer or preliminary, if it were to be somewhere stated as preliminary, and it didn't make it to us. what Amy's saying, Amy, it's always sad when people are victims of violent crime, whether it be muggings or murders or assaults. And you talk about the residents, the conditions. Now, I wasn't here in 2004, 2005 when it started. But one thing that gets lost in this, and this is the big picture we have to look at once we get past the legal part to the policy part, because ultimately the city must decide what it wants to do, should it win or lose. And it's going to be expensive either way. It was a group of residents themselves that said, no, don't take it away from us. So remember, we all have opinions, but not everybody's opinion is 100% the same as the next person. And a matter of fact, when we talk of violent crimes, and it tears me up, I'm a father, but I believe in the last 2 or 3 years, and Chief Benton might correct me if I'm wrong, while Evergreen Terrace has had no murders, District 3 has had 2. We can't judge anymore in today's world. We can't judge based on history from 15 or 18 years ago. And I won't judge it based on who's been assaulted, because there's people being assaulted all over, not just our city. And on some certain years, there's a higher assault rate here and a lower here. And it seems since the time that this was originally filed, it's dropped there. I've heard from certain people that are much more familiar than me with the facility that it certainly has come a long way. So these are the realities we have to balance when we get to that point. But it is a matter of looking at the total picture, you know, and we have to look at we are spending your money, everybody's money, all the residents' money, my money, and money has to be considered. I mean, is 30 million too much? Do we go to 45 million, 60 million? And Jeff, if you would explain, as we discussed recently with the council, should we lose? Now, the case is pretty much going to be in the judge's hand as soon as the ownership gets its new attorney. Should we lose, what could be the total if it was treble damages?
Triple damages?
Treble, I think you called it treble damages. You said something about 29 million? Worst case scenario?
Right, that was another lawsuit that has not really received much public attention. But as part of the tenant settlement, okay, that the council approved earlier this year, where the tenants that had initially opposed the condemnation and redevelopment of Evergreen Terrace agreed to drop out of that case and not oppose the condemnation and redevelopment of Evergreen Terrace. And as an additional consideration to the city, they agreed to dismiss a lawsuit that was filed a couple of years ago against the city by the same residents of Evergreen Terrace that had opposed the condemnation. And in that lawsuit, they had claimed that two things. One, that the condemnation of Evergreen Terrace was a violation of the city's civil rights certifications that it makes to the federal government when it receives CDBG funding. That's one point. And the other was, two, that the city did not live up to its CDBG obligations with respect to studying fair housing issues in Joliet. If that case had been successful, the city would have had to repay all the CDBG and home funding it had received for a 6-year period times 3, the treble damages. That would have been $27 million, okay? So that was one of the pieces of litigation that the owners didn't control. The owners didn't offer to settle that case as a part of that. We knew what was going on at the time with that case. The owners, it was under seal, so I don't know if the owners knew about it, but they certainly didn't control the settlement of that case.
So I think
that was part of the settlement that you guys approved.
Right. And I think what I'm saying then, Amy, based on what Mr. Plyman just described, we're talking about millions in each facet of this case. And does anybody from staff, have they been commissioned? You may not have been directed to do it yet. Do we have a number of what it's going to take to tear down the buildings? And whatever number you give me, if it's $2 million, are we sure there's no asbestos in there? I'm told that if it's asbestos, it goes through the ceiling on removal and demolition. What Councilman Oderkirk was saying earlier tonight is, we don't have any of this information. And we're going to be shortly voting in months on spending with our eyes closed.
You know, is there asbestos in the property? As part of the federal mark-to-market renewal, ownership testified in court that it had conducted an asbestos review of the property and didn't find any asbestos in the mastic of the linoleum and floor tile of the property, limited asbestos in some of the heating systems, very common for piping insulation. You know, the issue of planning has come up, what to do in the future phases of the case, and those are very appropriate questions. The city has hired a contractor, a consulting firm, Holston Development out of Chicago, to assist us with all of those questions.
Have they provided us with an estimate of demolition?
We can certainly get some estimates of that. I think it's appropriate to start that planning process, and we already have. We've met with Holston a few times to develop an acquisition financing strategy for the property. The goal of that being to minimize the city's financial obligation with respect to acquisition costs. The part of the
Now, again,
federal
Jeff, with all due respect, we're getting into policy again, and we're also talking about the real estate market and the ups and downs and risks you take in redevelopment and development. So there's no prediction there. I guess what I'm saying, and I'm not directing it at you anymore, Jeff, I'm directing it at the rest of the council and to my fellow residents, is how can we make a decision when we don't even know what the final tab's gonna be? Not even close. We don't even have a basic estimate of it.
Mayor?
And it could be millions. It will be millions.
I just want to address, you know, we keep talking about improving the city of Joliet. And you're talking about spending money. We've already got, I forget the numbers, invested in this. What is it worth to offer safety to our residents where they can live and they don't have to worry about being mugged? What is it worth to have a single mother raise a family in an apartment that's not a one-room apartment? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give those residents a safer place to live, a better place to live. And to put a price on it, should we know how much it's going to cost? You're absolutely correct. But as far as I'm concerned, and the reason I did this, and I'm sure Bob's been there a lot of times when he was on the police department. I spent a lot of time at Evergreen Terrace, and I see what kind of conditions the people there were living in.
When you were fireman?
Yes, and it has improved. It has improved as far as crime, but the living conditions are still the same. You have families living in one-room apartments. The density's too high, and whatever crime there is too much. And you stated it's all over the city, but we have a chance to address that there. That Evergreen Terrace has brought down that whole neighborhood, and it's just going to get worse if we don't do something about it.
One thing, Mayor, to consider is a group of the tenants you're trying to protect from themselves said, stop it. Now, we've since negotiated with them as this process played out. They told us, stop suing to take our home away. That's a reality.
They did that because they were not sure they were going to have a place to live. And once we assured them they were going to have a place to live, they dropped the lawsuit.
Your Honor,
Mayor.
one quick thing.
Wait, Bob was next.
Well, and you're right, I have spent a lot of time in those buildings. I was a policeman for 10 years. I've arrested people in those buildings. I've responded to fire calls. I've responded to calls where children were thrown or fell out of the 5th floor window. I've been in fights in those buildings. I've had a gun stuck in my face, and I was involved in a hostage negotiation where I was pinned down in a stairwell for 3 hours. So believe me, I think I know better than anyone the condition in those buildings. That really isn't the issue. I know we want to wrap this up. I would like to suggest we wrap it up where we started. Jeff, if there is a plan, or if we have people who have a plan, will you please bring it to this council? As we've learned, the legal fees are astronomical and they continue to go up. We need to know. And I will also suggest, I met with members of the community who I think have at least the blueprints of a legitimate plan. They need to be consulted. I would be happy to facilitate it, which is what I said to start the conversation. But I agree with Councilman Hug. No more. We spent $1.9 million, and we still are completely unclear about where we're going to be if we win this lawsuit, and that can't continue.
I guess we did ask Jeff to bring somebody forward to explain how it's going to work.
My suggestion, before I got accused of policy, was that we do start a process where we bring in Holston, or members of the council meet with Holston, but also that we do two things. The planning we have two jobs in front of us, assuming the case goes our way, all right? And one is, how do you acquire the property off city budget? And then secondly, how do you redevelop the property and provide alternative housing for the residents off city budget? Both of those are very possible. It's done all the time by public housing agencies and low-income housing providers throughout the country. The consultant that you have engaged knows how to do this. He's done it successfully. He's already working on our case and our development, just like he has other clients as well, but he's working for us very diligently. And I would like permission or direction to begin a process where we involve members of the community and members of the council or some committee of the council to assist and meet with the consultant to begin that process of both acquisition, financing strategy, and redevelopment. What should the redevelopment be? And part of that is we have a lot of decisions you have to make. Assuming we're successful in this phase of the case, the settlement we have with the federal government and with the tenants gives us, the city council, you guys, the decision to decide how extensive redevelopment of the Evergreen Terrace property is. Do you want to reduce the number of units on property from 356 to some lesser number? You can go down to 115 on site in a very early phase under the settlement agreement. But you may decide to preserve more, either on site or somewhere in the community. The minimum commitment the city made to the federal government is somewhere in Joliet. Out of that 356 units, there will be 115 that survive. It doesn't have to be the 115 that are at the Evergreen Terrace site. The city has the ability, like the Housing Authority did with Pool Gardens and Liberty Meadows, to redevelop the property and create 115 new units at one or more locations throughout the city. And so it's up to you guys, with the community's assistance, to figure out how big a project do you want to undertake, what are the financial sources and means to make it happen, and how do you want the ultimate project to look like? Do you want it to be 356 units when you're done? Do you want it to be 115? Do you want it to be a number in between? Where do you want them? Would you like them in multiple locations in the city, or would you like them at key locations in the city? These are all decisions you have to make under the federal settlement agreement. We have a consultant, very qualified, already engaged and retained to help give you advice to make those decisions with the community's involvement. And, you know, as this phase of the litigation comes to a conclusion, there's no more trial testimony. That part of the case is done. We have a little more luxury to go ahead with a planning phase and not worry about lawyers on the other side hauling you into court to talk about your planning decision-making. You have a little bit more flexibility in the issues you can take into account.
And when it's
That's
appealed?
the next step, is
When
to
it's
start
appealed?
with Holston.
Please,
When it's appealed?
please, Mike?
No, I was just gonna, that's what I was gonna talk about, the consultant we have on
trying
board,
to take a
Holston, to provide us with answers, or questions to our answers, so.
No, somebody over here.
And when it's appealed?
John?
Very quickly, and just to kind of pick up on a little bit what Jeff had said, and he kind of mentioned a lot what I would say, you know, this is going to be an expensive deal, and not to belabor this subject, it's already, 5 minutes to 9 here. But it is going to be an expensive deal, there's no question. The cost of acquisition, the cost of demolition, the cost of relocating residents. But I think to pepper Jeff on these questions is probably not the right time. I think we do, and Jeff, if you're looking for some type of authority from the council, I would engage Holston right now to have them prepare to come in and make a presentation before this council so we can, after obviously the litigation is over, so we have, what the acquisitions cost are going to be, what it's going to cost for, as Councilman Hugg said, demolition, if there's asbestos in the building. And really it's going to come down to a cost-benefit decision.
Councilman Holston is already formally engaged. He's under
Excellent.
contract. The retainer's been paid. And I think
We just
staff
need, what we
already
need,
has
Jeff,
been
is a
directed-
PowerPoint to be presented,
Yeah.
to
Right.
the council, so we can make an informed decision. Because it is going to come down to a cost-benefit decision. As the mayor said, how do you put a cost on a young woman living in a one-room apartment? I don't know that you can, but I think that, what does it do to our downtown that Evergreen Terrace still being there? So it's going to come down to a cost benefit. If someone gave us a number of $100 million,
Right.
I'm sure we might think twice about doing it. Similarly, if we had a number of $3.5 million, which they had back in 2005, which we don't anymore, we might jump all over it right now. So I think that's why we need to really nail down, and Holston, I think they're the professionals to be able to do that. With respect to this letter, we can kick around here whether this letter should have been given to us or not. I'm not so sure that it was Jeff's obligation to give it to us. It wasn't addressed to him. He certainly gave us the facts in this letter. When he talked about the legal fees, it doesn't say that the ownership would forego any legal fees. They just said they forego any legal fees due from Joliet. And then you bump up to the one bullet point where it says HUD shall provide rents. Basically, the way I understand that, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, if the subsidized rent is $1,500, they're basically saying you're gonna pay for our legal fees, and now it's gonna be $3,000.
Right.
Is that pretty much it?
Jack up the rents to cover legal fees and debt payment.
And I think that was discussed. In our executive session. Again, we can kick around, should we have been provided this letter or not? We can debate that probably till midnight. But I think, in my personal view, as far as what I heard and what I read here, I think the substance was discussed by you, our council. So anyway, those are just my thoughts. Hopefully, Jeff, you move quickly on getting Holston to this council, because it's a hot issue. It's not talked about just between the 9 of us up here. The entire community is talking about it, and I think we should move sooner rather than later on a decision regarding Evergreen Terrace. So.
Thanks, Sam.
I thought you were going to council.
I am, but I looked at him, and he didn't say nothing.
No, go ahead, let them talk first.
Okay.
I was under the impression that there was already violations at Evergreen Terrace that were unacceptable to HUD. The other thing that when I learned that the HUD funds were released, that then we could then actually do something for the residents of Evergreen Terrace. It's my understanding that part of the HUD's fees for their rent and what they pay and so forth are to go to the betterment of the people that are there. And I've been told that 75% of the people in there want to get out. They want to be on their own. And so what education are we giving them under HUD, that HUD would pay for, and what quality of life issues are being addressed up there now? How do we want to invest our money? What are we going to get return on investment if we can get better quality of life for the people that are already there? Let's do it. And I appreciate, as painful as this is to everybody, I appreciate you airing it, because I really thought you were much further along than you are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You said something very poetic. What about the community? Where's the community's input in this? I have people in my area where I've had 7 homicides in the past few years, where I've had Evergreen people. You want to see the condemned on the buildings? Okay, what are you going to do to protect me, or what are my rights in this? Are you going to give us 40 more police officers? When you move all this out here that has to be monitored, that comes along with their family members causing this trouble, are they going to say, we won't do anything anymore?
And I think it's directed at me, right?
Are they going to stop my people from moving out of my area?
I can guarantee you, if we spend $40 million on this project when it's all said and done, if that's the end, not $100 million, $40 million, I won't be able to hire any police. There's your police. I've got an ambulance 9 out in my district that's shut down permanently for all intents and purposes. There's the money for that. As a matter of fact, the whole reason the taxes were increased in 2011 was to cover these bills, these liquor bills, and don't let anybody fool you. So it's not about not caring about people. Amy had said earlier, the mayor said, how much is too much? The sky's the limit. It's not whether people are worth something. It's the very cold, hard reality. We have to decide, can we afford to pay it?
Right.
That's what we're down to.
And you're dealing with people, okay? You can't say I'm gonna go improve your life, Georgine, unless I want it improved. So community input, there should be a committee formed on that, and I'd be very willing to sit on that the community has some input on this.
Oversee it.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
One final thing, can I just say?
I'm going to address, the taxes weren't raised to pay for this. The taxes were raised because we were looking at a $17 million deficit because building has gone down, tap-on fees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you went through the budget, you'd know that. It wasn't raised to pay the fees for Evergreen Terrace.
Thank you, Mayor. To coin your phrase, I guess we can agree to disagree.
Okay.
Okay.
Your Honor, I think Jeff has told us numerous times in closed session that Hosting, is that? Hosting, the company that we've contracted with, provides revenue streams to pay for this, not out of the general budget. There's certain ways you can pay for it, and I'm sure when they come down and make this presentation, they'll make that known.
I agree with John, though. Get ASAP. Let's
Sure.
get him down here to do a presentation.
Mayor?
Yes.
You were going in order for Evergreen?
Yes, well, I didn't hear you say anything. He just spoke.
I just had one last question for Jeff. Sorry, Jeff, to ask you another question, but you brought up a good point. You mentioned how the Housing Authority basically oversees public housing. So just to clarify this for me, so 65 years ago, the city of Joliet created the authority, the Housing Authority, to oversee public housing, correct?
65.
Something around there.
Yeah, post-war.
Why would the city all of a sudden want to get into the business to oversee public housing? I understand that, okay, we now finally, there's pressure, let's get somebody in and execute a plan and give us a blueprint, because we're being questioned on it. Why aren't we turning this over to this entity that we created over 65 years ago to oversee public housing? That's what we're talking about. We cannot manage our current assets. We discussed this in our strategic planning session, and we're discussing tonight and bringing in another consultant to tell us how to manage this. Can't we work with our entity that we've already formed to take this over, to let it be their liability?
That's a great point, and ultimately probably a wise move for the city to undertake. The Housing Authority operates 1,000 units of housing in Joliet and administers another 1,000 housing vouchers. It has several buildings. It's undertaken a lot of redevelopment. It's working with HUD right now on modernizing and redeveloping 2 of its major family housing facilities in Joliet. It already redeveloped Pool Gardens in Joliet, constructed Liberty Meadows in Joliet, and it did all that pretty much without a penny from City Hall, other than a year or two we threw in some NIP for Liberty Meadows, which the project benefited from, but probably didn't absolutely had need. So, 99.9% of everything the Housing Authority has ever done has been off city budget. And that's the way Evergreen Terrace can be too. The city's role in Evergreen Terrace is we were dealing with a desperate situation in 2005 where there only was one local public agency that had the willpower, the community support, and the legal authority to try to get control of the Evergreen Terrace property because it was completely dysfunctional. And the federal government had just extended that facility for another 30 years, and the community had had enough. So the community asked the city council to step up and fix the problem. And the only way to do that was to purchase it or condemn it. But in terms of long-term operation of whatever succeeds Evergreen Terrace, it will be an affordable housing entity, either the Housing Authority or something like the Housing Authority that has the means to operate the facility. It will not be on city budget. It will not be the city of Joliet. We could do an intergovernmental agreement at some point with the Housing Authority and have them involved for the day-to-day operations. You've already hired Holston Development as the property manager. That is who is going to manage Evergreen Terrace on a day-to-day basis for us should we be successful. It will not be city staff. They'll be paid out of money provided by HUD. It will not be on the city balance sheet. It will come from HUD. Now, I know there are a lot of uncertainties because the case is not finished yet, and there are a wide range of outcomes, and because of that, there are hesitations and doubts and competing priorities, but it's ironic to me and a little quizzical to me that the Housing Authority could construct and operate over 2,000 housing units over 65 years without using the city treasury, and City Hall can't redevelop Evergreen Terrace and basically reduce it to 115 units in some form, and also do that without using city tax dollars. The Housing Authority has always done it. There's no reason why we can't do it either. It's just a matter of getting through the litigation process and the planning process. And I hear you. You want to get going on the planning process.
Well, and I think the difference is the city of Joliet's not in the business to oversee and operate public housing. The Housing Authority is. They have the resources and the talents to operate, as you said. We do not. We have proven year over year of throwing good money after bad money on investments and capital projects that we own. I won't beat this over a dead horse, but I'd like that to be entertained when we're looking at opportunities and options if we do acquire the site.
One last comment, Mayor, in response to getting a community involved. I don't know for sure, Jeff, Bob, you correct me, probably we're not going to have something before us to vote on by November. Let's put it to referendum citywide. There's the community involvement. We buy it or we don't buy it. Anybody object to that?
I do.
Do you object to the citizens being heard?
No, I object to citizens being heard. They want to be involved in the plan, but we were elected to make these decisions. Every decision we make, we got to go to referendum. We were elected to make this decision.
Referendum? Tom, what referendum?
Didn't you say to let this?
We've never had another referendum. That'd be the first one.
Didn't you just mention a referendum?
You said every decision we make, we have to go to referendum.
I says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to make this, go to referendum. That's why we were elected, and if we make the wrong decisions, they can address that at the election, okay? To get city involvement on what we're going to do, absolutely, 100%, I agree, they should be involved. But the decision rests with us.
Well, I'm still putting it out there, Tom, and I would encourage the public to call each and every one of us and city staff to voice their opinion on a referendum.
And I agree. I agree.
Well, you have to understand, there's people in other portions of the city that don't want to spend $50 million on a 4-block area, and they have to be heard too.
You know what? I wonder if their mind would change if this was in their community. If this was in their community, would their mind change?
Tom, we can't solve all the social ills of the world.
Sure.
Well, I guess, Jeff, you're saying for the city to get control, not to manage it, not to do the day-to-day. That's where Holstein is going to step in and do that. Is that kind of what we were at?
Yeah. I always thought the key to quality housing was to have responsible ownership and management. That was not possible with the ownership and management at Evergreen. And so a decision was made by the council in 2005 to get control through condemnation. If we could have got responsible management short of acquisition, I'm sure, we tried for years, we tried, and it just didn't happen. So the city is not going to operate Evergreen Terrace out of neighborhood services.
Right.
We've hired Holston Management. They operate these facilities in Chicago today. Many more units than the 356 at Evergreen Terrace, many more. They're highly proficient in doing that. That's who will do it for us.
And as John said, maybe we get them in as quick as possible to show us a revenue stream. So we won't be saying it's going to come from city money or, who, just so we be clear on that. Because it may come from have to come from city money, it may not. And then the other thing, I think Larry pointed out a couple of times that it was a group of people that didn't want to. What, it was like 4?
Right.
I think that was in that lawsuit. That's the group you're talking about, Larry? The 4, as opposed to 350 units.
There are 356 units.
And only 4 people.
And 4
was in
people.
this.
Yeah, and they were recruited by ownership probably. But that's all that could be mustered up.
But still, right, okay.
I think we're going to kick the heck out of this.
I think what Council Morris is referring to as far as the revenue stream is really a financing structure. I think that's, and I'm sure Holstein is very proficient in, in that, so.
Anything else?
Just to recap, Jeff, could ownership then, instead of the city having ownership of it, could the ownership go to the Housing Authority? Like Fairview, Des Plaines?
Well, it could, although, I think currently where you'd probably want to have ownership is with some limited liability company that is created just for the purpose of either operating what's at Evergreen Terrace or for redeveloping it. That's what HUD usually requires. And for a public housing agency to come in and do it, it could happen, but they would have to create a single purpose entity to actually do it. And that probably sounded too technical, but there is a HUD requirement that the entity that operates project-based Section 8 be a single-purpose entity, not a unit of general government. You need to set up that intermediary body.
But even though Holston would manage it, at the end of the day, the ownership comes back to the city.
The
No different
control
than-
would. The control would, yes.
All right.
Okay.
Mayor, just to let the folks know at home, my husband had an accident. He was in surgery. I just got home a half an hour ago. I haven't had a shower or have I eaten all day. But I turned this on when I got home, and I just felt compelled to come down here to weigh in on this because I owe the people of Joliet another opinion. And I have to agree with what the mayor said and other folks. This is a quality of life issue, and when this first started in 2005, when I was a novice on this city council, we agreed from day one it was a quality of life issue, and you cannot put a price on quality of life in the surrounding neighborhoods. And maybe 7 people said they wanted to stay there, but there were hundreds of others that didn't want to stay there. They said the conditions were horrible, and they left. My husband served on the Joliet Police Department for 35 years. He knows the conditions there. He went there on calls. He knows what it was like. I also know police officers that lived there for a while. It wasn't 15 years ago that this just happened. It's still ongoing. Nobody has done what they said they were going to do. So I agree this is quality of life. I think the people should have a say. And if we're going to help the city and help the surrounding communities around it and the surrounding neighborhoods, we need to go forward with this. We've come too far to let it go now, no matter what anybody else says. And I think a lot of this is just grandstanding because they're running for mayor. Thank you.
So motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mayor,
Second?
I have a request
Okay.
to go
Don't say
into...
executive session.
Yes, briefly for collective bargaining, specifically the ASME negotiations.
All right, okay. You got breakfast ordered? Is there a motion to executive session?
Were we supposed to be notified of this?
No, it's on the agenda.
No, we agreed as a council that we were going to be notified before executive sessions. Did we not?
I don't recall.
You guys have amnesia?
Okay, you're notified. We're having a closed session.
Wait, can I get a second? Second. Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Hey,
You guys agree
I
on one
usually
thing?
do a roll call.
Piss
vote.
backwards.
Yes.